Chapter 11. The Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte. The Château of Vaux-le-Vicomte, situated about a league from Melun, had been built by Fouquet in 1655, at a time when there was a scarcity of money in France. Mazarin had taken all that there was, and Fouquet expended the remainder. However, as certain men have fertile, false, and useful vices, Fouquet, in scattering broadcast millions of money in the construction of this palace, had found a means of gathering, as the result of his generous profusion, three illustrious men together: Leval, the architect of the building; Lenôtre, the designer of the gardens; and Lebrun, the decorator of the apartments. If the Château de Vaux possessed a single fault with which it could be reproached, it was its grand, pretentious character. It is even at the present day proverbial to calculate the number of acres of roofing, the restoration of which would, in our age, be the ruin of fortunes cramped and narrowed as the epoch itself. Vaux-le-Vicomte, when its magnificent gates, supported by caryatids, have been passed through, has the principal front of the main building opening upon a vast, so-called court of honor, enclosed by deep ditches, bordered by a magnificent stone balustrade. Nothing could be more noble in appearance than the central forecourt raised upon a flight of steps, like a king upon his throne, having around it four pavilions at the angles, the immense Ionic columns of which rose majestically to the whole height of the building. The friezes ornamented with arabesques and the pediments which crowned the pilasters conferred richness and grace on every part of the building, while the domes which surmounted the whole added proportion and majesty. This mansion, built by a subject, bore a far greater resemblance to those royal residences which Wolsey fancied he was called upon to construct, in order to present them to his master from the fear of rendering him jealous. But if magnificence and splendor were displayed in any one particular part of this palace more than another, if anything could be preferred to the wonderful arrangement of the interior, to the sumptuousness of the gilding, and to the profusion of the paintings and statues, it would be the park and gardens of Vaux. The jets d'eau, which were regarded as wonderful in 1653, are still so, even at the present time. The cascades awaken the admiration of kings and princes, and as for the famous grotto, the theme of so many poetical effusions, the residence of that illustrious nymph of Vaux, whom Polisson made converse with La Fontaine, we must be spared a description of all its beauties. We will do as Despreaux did. We will enter the park, the trees of which are of 8 years' growth only, that is to say, in their present position, and whose summits even yet, as they proudly tower aloft, blushingly unfold their leaves to the earliest rays of the rising sun. Lenôtre had hastened the pleasure of the Maecenas of his period. All the nursery grounds had furnished trees whose growth had been accelerated by careful culture and the richest plant food. Every tree in the neighborhood which presented a fair appearance of beauty or stature had been taken up by its roots and transplanted to the park. Fouquet could well afford to purchase trees to ornament his park, since he had bought up 3 villages and their appurtenances, to use a legal word, to increase its extent. M. de Scudery said of this palace, that, for the purpose of keeping the grounds and gardens well watered, M. Fouquet divided a river into 1,000 fountains, and gathered the waters of 1,000 fountains into torrents. This same Monsieur de Scudery said a great many other things as clearly about this palace of Valterra, the charms of which he describes most minutely. We should be far wiser to send our curious readers to Vaux to judge for themselves than to refer them to Cleely, and yet there are as many leagues from Paris to Vaux as there are volumes of the Cleely. This magnificent palace had been got ready for the reception of the greatest reigning sovereign of the time. Fouquet's friends had transported thither, some their actors in their dresses, others their troops of sculptors and artists, not forgetting others with their ready-mended pens. Floods of impromptus were contemplated. The cascades, somewhat rebellious nymphs though they were, poured forth their waters brighter and clearer than crystal. They scattered over the bronze Triton and nereids or waves of foam, which glistened like fire in the rays of the sun. An army of servants were hurrying to and fro in squadrons in the courtyard and corridors, while Fouquet, who had only that morning arrived, walked all through the palace with calm, observant glance, in order to give his last orders, after his attendants had inspected everything. It was, as we have said, the 15th of August. The sun poured down its burning rays upon the heathen deities of marble and bronze. It raised the temperature of the water in the conch shells and ripened on the walls those magnificent peaches, of which the king, 50 years later, spoke so regretfully when at Marly, on an occasion of scarcity of the finer sorts of peaches being complained of in the beautiful gardens there. Gardens which had cost France double the amount that had been expended on Vaux. The great king observed to someone, "You are far too young to have eaten any of M. Fouquet's peaches. Oh, fame! Oh, blazon of renown! Oh, glory of this earth!" That very man whose judgment was so sound and accurate where merit was concerned, he who had swept into his coffers the inheritance of Nicolas Fouquet, who had robbed him of Lenôtre and Lebrun, and had sent him to rot for the remainder of his life in one of the state prisons, merely remembered the peaches of that vanquished, crushed, forgotten enemy. It was to little purpose that Fouquet had squandered 30 millions of francs in the fountains of his gardens, in the crucibles of his sculptors, in the writing desks of his literary friends, in the portfolios of his painters. Vainly had he fancied that thereby he might be remembered. A peach, a blushing, rich-flavored fruit, nestling in the trellis work on the garden wall, hidden beneath its long, green leaves, this little vegetable production, that a dormouse would nibble up without a thought, was sufficient to recall to memory of this great monarch the mournful shade of the last superintendent of France. With a perfect reliance that Aramis had made arrangements fairly to distribute the vast number of guests throughout the palace, and that he had not omitted to attend to any of the internal regulations for their comfort, Fouquet devoted his entire attention to the ensemble alone. In one direction Gourville showed him the preparations which had been made for fireworks. In another, Molière led him over the theater. At last, after he had visited the chapel, the salons, and the galleries, and was again going downstairs, exhausted with fatigue, Fouquet saw Aramis on the staircase. The prelate beckoned to him. The superintendent joined his friend, and with him paused before a large picture scarcely finished, applying himself heart and soul to his work. The painter Lebrun, covered with perspiration, stained with paint, pale from fatigue and the inspiration of genius, was putting the last finishing touches with his rapid brush. It was a portrait of the king, whom they were expecting, dressed in the court suit which Percerin had condescended to show beforehand to the Bishop of Vannes. Fouquet placed himself before this portrait, which seemed to live, as one might say, in the cool freshness of its flesh and in its warmth of color. He gazed upon it long and fixedly, estimated the prodigious labor that had been bestowed upon it, and, not being able to find any recompense sufficiently great for this Herculean effort, he passed his arm round the painter's neck and embraced him. The superintendent, by this action, had utterly ruined a suit of clothes worth 1,000 pistoles, but he had satisfied, more than satisfied, Lebrun. It was a happy moment for the artist. It was an unhappy moment for M. Percerin, who was walking behind Fouquet and was engaged in admiring, in Lebrun's painting, the suit that he had made for His Majesty, a perfect objet d'art, as he called it, which was not to be matched except in the wardrobe of the superintendent. His distress and his exclamations were interrupted by a signal which had been given from the summit of the mansion, in the direction of Melun. In the still empty, open plain, the sentinels of Vaux had just perceived the advancing procession of the king and the queens. His Majesty was entering Melun with his long train of carriages and cavaliers. "In an hour," said Aramis to Fouquet. "In an hour," replied the latter, sighing. "And the people who ask one another what is the good of these royal fates," continued the Bishop of Vannes, laughing with his false smile. "Alas, I too, who am not the people, ask myself the same thing. I will answer you in 24 hours, Monseigneur. Assume a cheerful countenance, for it should be a day of true rejoicing." "Well, believe me or not, as you like, D'Herblay," said the superintendent, with a swelling heart, pointing at the cortege of Louis, visible on the horizon. "He certainly loves me but very little, and I do not care much more for him. But I cannot tell you how it is, that since he is approaching my house—" "Well, what?" "Well, since I know he is on his way here as my guest, he is more sacred than ever for me. He is my acknowledged sovereign, and as such is very dear to me." "Dear?" "Yes," said Aramis, playing upon the word, as the Abbé Terray did at a later period with Louis XV. "Do not laugh, D'Herblay. I feel that, if he really seemed to wish it, I could love that young man." "You should not say that to me," returned Aramis, "but rather to M. Colbert." "To M. Colbert!" exclaimed Fouquet. "Why so?" "Because he would allow you a pension out of the king's privy purse, as soon as he becomes superintendent. said Aramis, preparing to leave as soon as he had dealt this last blow. "Where are you going?" returned Fouquet, with a gloomy look. "To my own apartment, in order to change my costume, monseigneur." "Whereabouts are you lodging, D'Herblay?" "In the blue room on the second story." "The room immediately over the king's room?" "Precisely. You will be subject to very great restraint there. What an idea to condemn yourself to a room where you cannot stir or move about. During the night, monseigneur, I sleep or read in my bed." "And your servants?" "I have but one attendant with me. I find my reader quite sufficient. Adieu, monseigneur. Do not overfatigue yourself. Keep yourself fresh for the arrival of the king. We shall see you by and by, I suppose, and shall see your friend Du Vallon also. He is lodging next to me and is at this moment dressing." And Fouquet, bowing with a smile, passed on like a commander-in-chief who pays a different outpost a visit after the enemy has been signaled in sight. 2. Chapter 12. The Wine of Melun. The king had, in point of fact, entered Melun with the intention of merely passing through the city. The youthful monarch was most eagerly anxious for amusements. Only twice during the journey had he been able to catch a glimpse of La Valliere, and, suspecting that his only opportunity of speaking to her would be after nightfall, in the gardens, and after the ceremonial reception had been gone through, he had been very desirous to arrive at Vaux as early as possible. But he reckoned without his captain of the Musketeers, and without M. Colbert, like Calypso, who could not be consoled at the departure of Ulysses. Our Gascon could not console himself for not having guessed why Aramis had asked Percerin to show him the king's new costumes. "There is not a doubt," he said to himself, "that my friend the Bishop of Vannes had some motive in that." And then he began to rack his brains most uselessly. D'Artagnan, so intimately acquainted with all the court intrigues, who knew the position of Fouquet better than even Fouquet himself did, had conceived the strangest fancies and suspicions at the announcement of the fate, which would have ruined a wealthy man, and which became impossible, utter madness even, for a man so poor as he was. And then, the presence of Aramis, who had returned from Belle Isle, and been nominated by Monsieur Fouquet Inspector General of all the arrangements, his perseverance in mixing himself up with all the surintendent's affairs, his visits to Baisemeaux's, all this suspicious singularity of conduct had excessively troubled and tormented D'Artagnan during the last 2 weeks. With men of Aramis's stamp, he said, one is never the stronger except sword in hand. So long as Aramis continued a soldier, there was hope of getting the better of him. But since he has covered his cuirass with a stole, we are lost. But what can Aramis's object possibly be? And D'Artagnan plunged again into deep thought. "What does it matter to me? After all," he continued, "if his only object is to overthrow M. Colbert, and what else can he be after?" And D'Artagnan rubbed his forehead, that fertile land, whence the plowshare's nails had turned up so many and such admirable ideas in his time. He at first thought of talking the matter over with Colbert, but his friendship for Aramis, the oath of earlier days, bound him too strictly. He revolted at the bare idea of such a thing, and besides, he hated the financier too cordially. Then again, he wished to unburden his mind to the king, but yet the king would not be able to understand the suspicions which had not even a shadow of reality at their base. He resolved to address himself to Aramis, direct, the first time he met him. "I will get him," said the musketeer, between a couple of candles, suddenly, and when he least expects it. "I will place my hand upon his heart, and he will tell me—" "What will he tell me?" "Yes, he will tell me something, for Mordieux. There is something in it, I know." Somewhat calmer, D'Artagnan made every preparation for the journey, and took the greatest care that the military household of the king, as yet very inconsiderable in numbers, should be well officered and well disciplined in its meager and limited proportions. The result was that, through the captain's arrangements, the king, on arriving at Melun, saw himself at the head of both the musketeers and Swiss guards, as well as a picket of the French guards. It might almost have been called a small army. Colbert looked at the troops with great delight. He even wished they had been a third more in number. "But why?" said the king. "In order to show greater honor to M. Fouquet," replied Colbert. "In order to ruin him the sooner," thought D'Artagnan. When this little army appeared before Melun, the chief magistrates came out to meet the king, and presented with the keys of the city, and invited him to enter the Hôtel de Ville in order to partake of the wine of honor. The king, who expected to pass through the city and to proceed to Vaux without delay, became quite red in the face from vexation. "Who was fool enough to occasion this delay?" muttered the king between his teeth, as the chief magistrate was in the middle of a long address. "Not I, certainly," replied D'Artagnan, "but I believe it was M. Colbert." Colbert, having heard his name pronounced, said, "What was M. D'Artagnan good enough to say?" "I was good enough to remark that it was you who stopped the king's progress, so that he might taste of vin de Brie. Was I right?" "Quite so, monsieur. In that case, then, it was you whom the king called some name or other." "What name?" "I hardly know, but wait a moment. Idiot, I think it was, no, it was fool or dolt. Yes. His Majesty said that the man who had thought of the vin de melon was something of the sort." D'Artagnan, after this broadside, quietly caressed his mustache. Colbert's large head seemed to become larger and larger than ever. D'Artagnan, seeing how ugly anger made him, did not stop halfway. The orator still went on with his speech, while the king's color was visibly increasing. "Mordioux," said the musketeer coolly, "the king is going to have an attack of determination of blood to the head. Where the deuce did you get hold of that idea, Monsieur Colbert? You have no luck." "Monsieur," said the financier, drawing himself up, "my zeal for the king's service inspired me with the idea." "Bah! Monsieur, Melun is a city, an excellent city, which pays well, and which it would be imprudent to displease. There now, I, who do not pretend to be a financier, saw only one idea in your idea." "What was that, monsieur?" "That of causing a little annoyance to M. Fouquet, who is making himself quite giddy on his donjons yonder, in waiting for us." This was a home stroke, hard enough in all conscience. Colbert was completely thrown out of the saddle by it and retired, thoroughly discomfited. Fortunately, the speech was now at an end. The king drank the wine which was presented to him, and then everyone resumed the progress through the city. The king bit his lips in anger, for the evening was closing in, and all hope of a walk with La Valliere was at an end. In order that the whole of the king's household should enter Vaux, for hours at least were necessary, owing to the different arrangements. The king, therefore, who was boiling with impatience, hurried forward as much as possible, in order to reach it before nightfall. But at the moment he was setting off again, other and fresh difficulties arose. "Is not the king going to sleep at Melun?" said Colbert, in a low tone of voice, to D'Artagnan. Colbert must have been badly inspired that day to address himself in that manner to the chief of the Musketeers, for the latter guessed that the king's intention was very far from that of remaining where he was. D'Artagnan would not allow him to enter Vaux except he were well and strongly accompanied, and desired that his Majesty would not enter except with all the escort. On the other hand, he felt that these delays would irritate that impatient monarch beyond measure. In what way could he possibly reconcile these difficulties? D'Artagnan took up Colbert's remark and determined to repeat it to the king. "Sire," he said, Colbert has been asking me if your Majesty does not intend to sleep at Melun." "Sleep at Melun? What for?" exclaimed Louis XIV. "Sleep at Melun? Who, in heaven's name, can have thought of such a thing, when M. Fouquet is expecting us this evening?" "It was simply," replied Colbert quickly, "the fear of causing your Majesty the least delay. For, according to established etiquette, you cannot enter any place, with the exception of your own royal residences, until the soldiers' quarters have been marked out by the quartermaster and the garrison properly distributed." D'Artagnan listened with the greatest attention, biting his mustache to conceal his vexation, and the queens were not less interested. They were fatigued, and would prefer to go to rest without proceeding any farther, more especially in order to prevent the king walking about in the evening with them to St. Aignan and the ladies of the court, for if etiquette required the princesses to remain within their own rooms, the ladies of honor, as soon as they had performed the services required of them, had no restrictions placed upon them, but were at liberty to walk about as they pleased. It will easily be conjectured that all these rival interests, gathering together in vapors, necessarily produced clouds, and that the clouds were likely to be followed by a tempest. The king had no mustache to gnaw, and therefore kept biting the handle of his whip instead, with ill-concealed impatience. How could he get out of it? D'Artagnan looked as agreeable as possible, and Colbert as sulky as he could. Who was there he could get in a passion with? "We will consult the Queen," said Louis XIV, bowing to the royal ladies. And this kindness of consideration softened Maria Theresa's heart, who, being of a kind and generous disposition, when left to her own free will, replied, "I shall be delighted to do whatever your Majesty wishes." "How long will it take us to get to Vaux?" inquired Anne of Austria, in slow and measured accents, placing her hand upon her bosom, where the seat of her pain lay. "An hour for your Majesty's carriages," said D'Artagnan. "The roads are tolerably good." The king looked at him. "And a quarter of an hour for the king," he hastened to add. "We should arrive by daylight," said Louis XIV. "But the billeting of the king's military escort," objected Colbert softly, "will make his Majesty lose all the advantage of his speed, however quick he may be." "Double acid you are," thought D'Artagnan. "If I had any interest or motive in demolishing your credit with the king, I could do it in 10 minutes. If I were in the king's place," he added aloud, "I should, in going to M. Fouquet, leave my escort behind me. I should go to him as a friend. I should enter accompanied only by my captain of the guards. I should consider that I was acting more nobly, and should be invested with a still more sacred character by doing so." Delight sparkled in the king's eyes. "That is indeed a very sensible suggestion. We will go to see a friend as friends. The gentlemen who are with the carriages can go slowly, but we who are mounted will ride on." And he rode off, accompanied by all those who were mounted. Colbert hid his ugly head behind his horse's neck. "I shall be quits," said D'Artagnan, as he galloped along, "by getting a little talk with Aramis this evening. And then, Fouquet is a man of honor. Mordioux, I have said so, and it must be so." And this was the way how, toward 7 o'clock in the evening, without announcing his arrival by the din of trumpets, and without even his advance guard, without outriders or musketeers, the king presented himself before the gate of Vaux, where Fouquet, who had been informed of his royal guest's approach, had been waiting for the last half hour, with his head uncovered, surrounded by his household and his friends. Chapter 13. Nectar and Ambrosia. Fouquet held the stirrup of the king, who, having dismounted, bowed most graciously, and more graciously still held out his hand to him, which Fouquet, in spite of slight resistance on the king's part, carried respectfully to his lips. The king wished to wait in the first courtyard for the arrival of the carriages, nor had he long to wait, for the roads had been put into excellent order by the superintendent, and a stone would hardly have been found the size of an egg the whole way from Melun to Vaux, so that the carriages, rolling along as though on a carpet, brought the ladies to Vaux, without jolting or fatigue, by 8 o'clock. They were received by Madame Fouquet, and at the moment they made their appearance, a light as bright as day burst forth from every quarter, trees, vases, and marble statues. This species of enchantment lasted until their majesties had retired into the palace. All these wonders and magical effects which the chronicler has heaped up, or rather embalmed, in his recital, at the risk of rivaling the brain-born scenes of romancers, these splendors were by night seemed vanquished and nature corrected, together with every delight and luxury combined to the satisfaction of all the senses, as well as the imagination. Fouquet did in real truth offer to his sovereign in that enchanting retreat, of which no monarch could at that time boast of possessing an equal. We do not intend to describe the grand banquet, at which the royal guests were present, nor the concerts, nor the fairy-like and more than magic transformations and metamorphoses. It will be enough for our purpose to depict the countenance the king assumed, which, from being gay, soon wore a very gloomy, constrained, and irritated expression. He remembered his own residence, royal though it was, and the mean and indifferent style of luxury that prevailed there, which comprised but little more than what was merely useful for the royal wants, without being his own personal property. The large vases of the Louvre, the older furniture and plate of Henry II, of Francis I, and of Louis XI, were but historic monuments of earlier days, nothing but specimens of art, the relics of his predecessors. While with Fouquet, the value of the article was as much in the workmanship as in the article itself. Fouquet ate from a gold service, which artists in his own employ had modeled and cast for him alone. Fouquet drank wines which the King of France did not even know the name, and drank them out of goblets each more valuable than the entire royal cellar. What, too, was to be said of the apartments, the hangings, the pictures, the servants and officers of every description of his household? What of the mode of service in which etiquette was replaced by order, stiff formality by personal, unrestrained comfort? The happiness and contentment of the guest became the supreme law of all who obeyed the host. The perfect swarm of busily engaged persons moving about noiselessly, the multitude of guests, who were, however, even less numerous than the servants who waited on them, the myriad of exquisitely prepared dishes, of gold and silver vases, the floods of dazzling light, the masses of unknown flowers of which the hothouses had been despoiled, redundant with luxuriance of unequaled scent and beauty, the perfect harmony of surroundings, which, indeed, was no more than the prelude of the promised fate, charmed all who were there, and they testified their admiration over and over again, not by voice or gesture, but by deep silence and rapt attention, those two languages of the courtier which acknowledge the hand of no master powerful enough to restrain them. What, too, was to be said of the apartments, the hangings, the pictures, the servants and officers of every description of his household? What of the mode of service in which etiquette was replaced by order, stiff formality by personal, unrestrained comfort? The happiness and contentment of the guest became the supreme law of all who obeyed the host. As for the king, his eyes filled with tears. He dared not look at the queen, and of Austria, whose pride was superior to that of any creature breathing, overwhelmed her host by the contempt with which she treated everything handed to her. The young queen, kind-hearted by nature and curious by disposition, praised Fouquet, ate with an exceedingly good appetite, and asked the names of the strange fruits as they were placed upon the table. Fouquet replied that he was not aware of their names. The fruits came from his own stores. He had often cultivated them himself, having an intimate acquaintance with the cultivation of exotic fruits and plants. The king felt and appreciated the delicacy of the replies, but was only the more humiliated. He thought the queen a little too familiar in her manners, and that Anne of Austria resembled Juno a little too much, in being too proud and haughty. His chief anxiety, however, was himself, that he might remain cold and distant in his behavior, bordering lightly the limits of supreme disdain or simple admiration. But Fouquet had foreseen all this. He was, in fact, one of those men who foresee everything. The king had expressly declared that, so long as he remained under Fouquet's roof, he did not wish his own different repast to be served in accordance with the usual etiquette, and that he would, consequently, dine with the rest of society, but by the thoughtful attention of the superintendent. The king's dinner was served up separately, if one may so express it, in the middle of the general table. The dinner, wonderful in every respect, from the dishes of which was comprised everything the king liked and generally preferred to anything else. Louis had no excuse, he, indeed, who had the keenest appetite in his kingdom, for saying that he was not hungry. Nay, Fouquet did even better still. He certainly, in obedience to the king's expressed desire, seated himself at the table, but as soon as the soups were served, he arose and personally waited on the king, while Madame Fouquet stood behind the Queen Mother's armchair. The disdain of Juno and the sulky fits of temper of Jupiter could not resist this excess of kindly feeling and polite attention. The queen ate a biscuit dipped in a glass of Saint-Lucar wine, and the king ate of everything, saying to M. Fouquet, "It is impossible, Monsieur le Surintendant, to dine better anywhere." Whereupon the whole court began, on all sides, to devour the dishes spread before them with such enthusiasm that it looked as though a cloud of Egyptian locusts was settling down on green and growing crops. As soon, however, as his hunger was appeased, the king became morose and overgloomed again, the more so in proportion to the satisfaction he fancied he had previously manifested, and particularly on account of the deferential manner which his courtiers had shown towards Fouquet. D'Artagnan, who ate a good deal and drank but little, without allowing to be noticed, did not lose a single opportunity, but made a great number of observations which he turned to good profit. When the supper was finished, the king expressed a wish not to lose the promenade. The park was illuminated. The moon, too, as if she had placed herself at the orders of the Lord of Vaux, silvered the trees and lake with her own bright and quasi-phosphorescent light. The air was strangely soft and balmy. The daintily shell-gravel walks through the thickly set avenues yielded luxuriously to the feet. The fete was complete in every respect, for the king, having met La Valliere in one of the winding paths of the wood, was able to press her hand and say, "I love you," without anyone overhearing him except D'Artagnan, who followed, and M. Fouquet, who preceded him. The dreamy night of magical enchantments stole smoothly on, the king having requested to be shown to his room. There was immediately a movement in every direction. The queens passed to their own apartments, accompanied by the music of their boss and lutes. The king found his musketeers awaiting him on the grand flight of steps, for M. Fouquet had brought them on from Melun and had invited them to supper. D'Artagnan's suspicions at once disappeared. He was weary, he had supped well and wished, for once in his life, thoroughly to enjoy a fete given by a man who was in every sense of the word a king. M. Fouquet, he said, is the man for me? The king was conducted with the greatest ceremony to the chamber of Porthos, of which we owe some cursory description to our readers. It was the handsomest and largest in the palace. Lebrun had painted on the vaulted ceiling the happy as well as the unhappy dreams which Morpheus inflicts on kings, as well as on other men. Everything that sleep gives birth to that is lovely, its fairy scenes, its flowers and nectar, the wild voluptuousness or profound repose of the senses, had the painter elaborated on his frescoes. It was a composition as soft and pleasing in one part, as dark and gloomy and terrible in another. The poisoned chalice, the glittering dagger suspended over the head of the sleeper, wizards and phantoms with terrific masks, those half-dim shadows more alarming than the approach of fire or the somber face of midnight, these, and such as these, he had made the companions of his more pleasing pictures. No sooner had the king entered his room than a cold shiver seemed to pass through him, and on Fouquet asking him the cause of it, the king replied, as pale as death, "I am sleepy, that is all. Does your majesty wish for your attendance at once?" "No, I have to talk with a few persons first," said the king. "Will you have the goodness to tell M. Colbert I wish to see him?" Fouquet bowed and left the room. Chapter 14. A Gascon and a half. D'Artagnan had determined to lose no time, and in fact he never was in the habit of doing so. After having inquired for Aramis, he had looked for him in every direction until he had succeeded in finding him. Besides, no sooner had the king entered Vaux than Aramis had retired to his own room, meditating, doubtless, some new piece of gallant attention for his majesty's amusement. D'Artagnan desired the servants to announce him, and found on the second story, in a beautiful room called the Blue Chamber, on account of the color of its hangings, the Bishop of Vannes in company with Porthos and several of the modern Epicureans. Aramis came forward to embrace his friend and offered him the best seat. As it was after a while generally remarked among those present that the musketeer was reserved and wished for an opportunity for conversing secretly with Aramis, the Epicureans took their leave. Porthos, however, did not stir, for true it is that, having dined exceedingly well, he was fast asleep in his armchair, and the freedom of conversation therefore was not interrupted by a third person. Porthos had a deep, harmonious snore, and people might talk in the midst of his loud bass without fear of disturbing him. D'Artagnan felt that he was called upon to open the conversation. "Well, and so we have come to Vaux," he said. "Why, yes, D'Artagnan. And how do you like the place?" "Very much, and I like M. Fouquet also. Is he not a charming host?" "No one could be more so. I am told that the king began by showing great distance of manner towards M. Fouquet, but that his majesty grew much more cordial afterwards." "You did not notice it, then, since you say you have been told so?" "No. I was engaged with a gentleman who have just left the room about the theatrical performances and the tournaments which are to take place tomorrow." "Ah, indeed. You are the Comptroller General of the Fates here, then?" "You know, I am a friend of all kinds of amusement where the exercise of the imagination is called into activity. I have always been a poet in one way or another." "Yes, I remember the verses you used to write. They were charming." "I have forgotten them, but I am delighted to read the verses of others, when those others are known by the names of Molière, Polisson, La Fontaine, etc. Do you know what idea occurred to me this evening, Aramis?" "No. Tell me what was, for I should never be able to guess it. You have so many." "Well, the idea occurred to me that the true king of France is not Louis XIV. "What?" said Aramis, involuntarily, looking the Musketeer full in the eyes. "No, it is Monsieur Fouquet." Aramis breathed again and smiled. "Ah, you are like all the rest jealous," he said. "I would wager that it was M. Colbert who turned that pretty phrase." D'Artagnan, in order to throw Aramis off his guard, related Colbert's misadventures with regard to the vin de melon. "He comes of a mean race, does Colbert," said Aramis. "Quite true. When I think, too," added the bishop, that fellow will be your minister within 4 months, and that you will serve him as blindly as you did Richelieu or Mazarin." "And as you serve M. Fouquet," said D'Artagnan. "With this difference, though, that M. Fouquet is not M. Colbert." "True, true," said D'Artagnan, as he pretended to become sad and full of reflection, and then, a moment after, he added, "Why do you tell me that M. Colbert will be minister in 4 months?" "Because M. Fouquet will have ceased to be so," replied Aramis. "He will be ruined, you mean?" said D'Artagnan. "Completely so." "Why does he give these fates, then?" said the Musketeer, in a tone so full of thoughtful consideration, and so well assumed, that the bishop was for the moment deceived by it. "Why did you not dissuade him from it?" The latter part of the phrase was just a little too much, and Aramis's former suspicions were again aroused. "It is done with the object of humoring the king." "By ruining himself?" "Yes, by ruining himself for the king. A most eccentric, one might say, sinister calculation that—" Necessity, my friend. I don't see that, dear Aramis." "Do you not? Have you not remarked M. Colbert's daily increasing antagonism, and that he is doing his utmost to drive the king to get rid of the superintendent? One must be blind not to see it. And that a cabal is already armed against M. Fouquet? That is well known. What likelihood is there that the king would join a party formed against a man who will have spent everything he had to please him?" "True, true," said D'Artagnan, slowly, hardly convinced, yet curious to broach another phase of conversation. "There are follies and follies," he resumed, "and I do not like those you are committing." "What do you allude to?" "As for the banquet, the ball, the concert, the theatricals, the tournaments, the cascades, the fireworks, the illuminations, and the presents, these are well and good, I grant. But why were not these expenses sufficient? Why was it necessary to have new liveries and costumes for your whole household?" "You are quite right. I told M. Fouquet that myself. He replied that if he were rich enough, he would offer the king a newly erected chateau, from the vanes of the houses to the very subcellars, completely new inside and out, and that, as soon as the king had left, he would burn the whole building and its contents, in order that it might not be made use of by anyone else." How completely Spanish. I told him so, and he then added this: "Whoever advises me spare expense, I shall look upon as my enemy. It is positive madness, and that portrait, too." "What portrait?" said Aramis. "That of the king, and the surprise as well." "What surprise?" "The surprise you seem to have in view, and on account of which you took some specimens away, when I met you at Purcherin's." D'Artagnan paused. The shaft was discharged, and all he had to do was to wait and watch its effect. "That is merely an act of graceful attention," replied Aramis. D'Artagnan went up to his friend, took hold of both his hands, and looking him full in the eyes, said, "Aramis, do you still care for me a very little?" "What a question to ask." "Very good. One favor. Then, why did you take some patterns of the king's costumes at Purcherin's? Come with me and ask poor Lebrun, who has been working upon them for the last 2 days and nights." "Aramis, that may be true for everybody else, but for me—" "Upon my word, D'Artagnan, you astonish me. Be a little considerate. Tell me the exact truth. You would not like anything disagreeable to happen to me, would you?" "My dear friend, you are becoming quite incomprehensible. What suspicion can you have possibly got hold of? Do you believe in my instinctive feelings? Formerly you used to have faith in them. Well then, an instinct tells me that you have some concealed project on foot." "A project? I am convinced of it." "What nonsense!" "I am not only sure of it, but I would even swear it." "Indeed, D'Artagnan, you cause me the greatest pain. Is it likely, if I have any project in hand that I ought to keep secret from you, I should tell you about it? If I had one that I could and ought to have revealed, should I not have long ago divulged it? No, Aramis, no. There are certain projects which are never revealed until a favorable opportunity arrives. In that case, my dear fellow, returned the bishop, laughing, the only thing now is that the opportunity has not yet arrived. D'Artagnan shook his head with a sorrowful expression. Oh, friendship, friendship, he said. What idle word you are. Here is a man who, if I were but to ask it, would suffer himself to be cut in pieces for my sake. You are right, said Aramis, nobly. And this man, who would shed every drop of blood in his veins for me, will not open up before me the least corner in his heart. Friendship, I repeat, is nothing but an unsubstantial shadow, a lure, like everything else in this bright, dazzling world. It is not thus you should speak of our friendship, replied the bishop in a firm, assured voice, for ours is not the same nature as those of which you've been speaking. Look at us, Aramis, 3 out of the old 4. You are deceiving me. I suspect you, and Porthos is fast asleep. An admirable trio of friends. Don't you think so? What an affecting relic of the former dear old times. I can only tell you one thing, D'Artagnan, and I swear it on the Bible. I love you just as I used to do. If I ever suspect you, it is on account of others, and not on account of either of us. In everything I may do, and should happen to succeed in, you will find your fourth. Will you promise me the same favor? If I am not mistaken, Aramis, your words, at the moment you pronounce them, are full of generous feeling. Such a thing is very possible. You are conspiring against M. Colbert. If that be all, Mordieux, tell me so at once. I have the instrument in my own hand, and will pull out the tooth easily enough. Aramis could not conceal a smile of disdain that flitted over his haughty features. And supposing that I were conspiring against Colbert, what harm would there be in that? No, no. That would be too trifling a matter for you to take in hand. And it was not on that account you asked Percerin for those patterns of the king's costumes. Oh, Aramis, we are not enemies. Remember, we are brothers. Tell me what you wish to undertake. And, upon the word of a D'Artagnan, if I cannot help you, I will swear to remain neuter. I am undertaking nothing, said Aramis. Aramis, a voice within me speaks and seems to trickle forth a rill of light within my darkness. It is a voice that has never yet deceived me. It is the king you are conspiring against. The king? Exclaimed the bishop, pretending to be annoyed. Your face will not convince me. The king, I repeat. Will you help me? Said Aramis, smiling ironically. Aramis, I will do more than help you. I will do more than remain neuter. I will save you. You are mad, D'Artagnan. I am the wiser of the two in this matter. You to suspect me of wishing to assassinate the king. Who spoke of such a thing? Smiled the musketeer. Well, let us understand one another. I do not see what anyone can do to a legitimate king as ours is, if he does not assassinate him. D'Artagnan did not say a word. Besides, you have your guards and your musketeers here, said the bishop. True, you are not in M. Fouquet's house, but in your own. True, but in spite of that, Aramis, grant me, for pity's sake, one single word of a true friend. A true friend's word is ever truth itself. If I think of touching, even with my finger, the son of Austria, the true king of this realm of France, if I had not the firm intention of prostrating myself before his throne, if in every idea I may entertain tomorrow, here at Vaux, will not be the most glorious day my king ever enjoyed, may heaven's lightning blast me where I stand. Aramis had pronounced these words with his face turned towards the alcove of his own bedroom, where D'Artagnan, seated with his back towards the alcove, could not suspect that anyone was lying concealed. The earnestness of his words, the studied slowness with which he pronounced them, the solemnity of his oath, gave the musketeer the most complete satisfaction. He took hold of both Aramis's hands and shook them cordially. Aramis had endured reproaches without turning pale, and had blushed as he listened to words of praise. D'Artagnan, deceived, did him honor, but D'Artagnan, trustful and reliant, made him feel ashamed. "Are you going away?" he said, as he embraced him, in order to conceal the flush on his face. "Yes, duty summons me. I have to get the watchword. It seems I am to be lodged in the king's anteroom. Where does Porthos sleep? Take him away with you, if you like, for he rumbles through his sleepy nose like a park of artillery. Ah, he does not stay with you, then, said D'Artagnan. Not the least in the world. He has a chamber to himself, but I don't know where. Very good, said the Musketeer, from whom the separation of the two associates removed his last suspicion, and he touched Porthos lightly on the shoulder. The latter replied by a loud yawn. Come, said D'Artagnan. What, D'Artagnan, my dear fellow, is that you? What a lucky chance. Oh, yes, true. I have forgotten. I am at the fete at Vaux. Yes, and your beautiful dress, too. Yes, it was very attentive on the part of Monsieur Coquelin de Volière, was it not? Hush, said Aramis. You are walking so heavily you will make the flooring give way. True, said the Musketeer. This room is above the dome, I think. And I did not choose it for a fencing room, I assure you, added the bishop. The ceiling of the king's room has all the lightness and calm of wholesome sleep. Do not forget, therefore, that my flooring is merely the covering of his ceiling. Good night, my friends, and in 10 minutes I shall be asleep myself. And Aramis accompanied them to the door, laughing quietly all the while. As soon as they were outside, he bolted the door hurriedly, closed up the chinks of the windows, and then called out, Monseigneur, Monseigneur. Philippe made his appearance from the alcove, as he pushed aside a sliding panel placed behind the bed. D'Artagnan entertains a great many suspicions, it seems, he said. Ah, you recognize D'Artagnan, then? Before you called him by his name, even, he is your captain of musketeers. He is very devoted to me, replied Philippe, laying a stress upon the personal pronoun. As faithful as a dog, but he bites sometimes. If D'Artagnan does not recognize you before the other has disappeared, rely upon D'Artagnan to the end of the world. For in that case, if he sees nothing, he will keep his fidelity. If he sees when it is too late, he is a Gascon, and will never admit that he has been deceived. I thought so. What are we to do now? Sit in this folding chair. I am going to push aside a portion of the flooring. You will look through the opening, which answers to one of the false windows made in the dome of the king's apartment. Can you see? Yes, said Philippe, starting as at the sight of an enemy. I see the king. What is he doing? He seems to wish some man to sit down close to him. Fouquet? No, wait a moment. Look at the notes and the portraits, my prince. The man whom the king wishes to sit down in his presence is M. Colbert. Colbert sit down in the king's presence, exclaimed Aramis. It is impossible. Look. Aramis looked through the opening in the flooring. Yes, he said, Colbert himself. Oh, Monseigneur, what can we be going to hear, and what can result from this intimacy? Nothing good for M. Fouquet at all events. The prince did not deceive himself. We have seen that Louis XIV had sent for Colbert, and Colbert had arrived. The conversation began between them by the king, according to him one of the highest favors that he had ever done. It was true the king was alone with his subject. Colbert, said he, sit down. The intendant, overcome with delight, for he feared he was about to be dismissed, refused this unprecedented honor. Does he accept? Said Aramis. No, he remains standing. Let us listen, then. And the future king and the future pope listened eagerly to the simple mortals they held under their feet, ready to crush them when they liked. Colbert, said the king, you have annoyed me exceedingly today. I know it, sire. Very good. I like that answer. Yes, you knew it, and there was courage in the doing of it. I ran the risk of displeasing your majesty, but I risked, also, the concealment of your best interests. What? You were afraid of something on my account. I was, sire. Even if it were nothing more than an indigestion, said Colbert. For people do not give their sovereign such banquets as the one of today, unless it be to stifle them beneath the burden of good living. Colbert awaited the effect this coarse jest would produce upon the king, and Louis XIV, who was the vainest and the most fastidiously delicate man in his kingdom, forgave Colbert the joke. The truth is, he said, that Fouquet has given me too good a meal. Tell me, Colbert, where does he get all the money required for this enormous expenditure? Can you tell? Yes, I do know, sire. Will you be able to prove it with tolerable certainty? Easily, and to the utmost farthing. I know you are very exact. Exactitude is the principal qualification required in an intendant of finances, but all are not so. I thank you, Majesty, for so flattering a compliment from your own lips. M. Fouquet, therefore, is rich, very rich, and I suppose every man knows he is so. Every one, sire, the living as well as the dead. What does that mean, Monsieur Colbert? The living are witnesses of M. Fouquet's wealth. They admire and applaud the result produced. But the dead, wiser and better informed than we are, know how that wealth was obtained, and they rise up in accusation. So that M. Fouquet owes his wealth to some cause or other. The occupation of an intendant very often favors those who practice it. You have something to say to me more confidentially. I perceive. Do not be afraid. We are quite alone. I am never afraid of anything under the shelter of my own conscience and under the protection of your Majesty, said Colbert, bowing. If the dead, therefore, were to speak. They do speak sometimes, sire, read. Ah, murmured Aramis in the prince's ear, who, close beside him, listened without losing a syllable. Since you are placed here, Monseigneur, in order to learn your vocation of a king, listen to a piece of infamy, of a nature truly royal. You are about to be a witness of one of those scenes which the foul fiend alone conceives and executes. Listen attentively. You will find your advantage in it. The prince redoubled his attention and saw Louis XIV take from Colbert's hands a letter the latter held out to him. The late cardinal's handwriting, said the king. Your Majesty has an excellent memory, replied Colbert, bowing. It is an immense advantage for a king who is destined for hard work to recognize handwritings at the first glance. The king read Mazarin's letter, and, as its contents are already known to the reader, in consequence of the misunderstanding between Madame de Chevreuse and Aramis, nothing further would be learned if we stated them here again. I do not quite understand, said the king, greatly interested. Your Majesty has not acquired the utilitarian habit of checking the public accounts. I see that it refers to money that had been given to M. Fouquet. 13 millions. A tolerably good sum. Yes. Well, these 13 millions are wanting to balance the total of the account. That is what I do not very well understand. How is this deficit possible? Possible, I do not say, but there is no doubt about fact that it is really so. You say that these 13 millions are found to be wanting in the accounts? I do not say so, but the registry does. And this letter of M. Mazarin indicates the employment of that sum and the name of the person with whom it was deposited? As your Majesty can judge for yourself. Yes, and the result is, then, that M. Fouquet has not yet restored the 13 millions. That results from the accounts. Certainly, sire. Well, and consequently, well, sire, in that case, inasmuch as M. Fouquet has not yet given back the 13 millions, he must have appropriated them to his own purpose, and with those 13 millions one could incur 4 times and a little more as much expense, and make 4 times as great a display, as your Majesty was able to do at Fontainebleau, where we only spent 3 millions altogether, if you remember. For a blunderer, the souvenir he had evoked was a rather skillfully contrived piece of baseness, for by the remembrance of his own fate he, for the first time, perceived his inferiority compared with that of Fouquet. Colbert received back again at Vaux what Fouquet had given him at Fontainebleau, and, as a good financier, returned it with the best possible interest. Having once disposed the king's mind in this artful way, Colbert had nothing of much importance to detain him. He felt that such was the case, for the king, too, had again sunk into a dull and gloomy state. Colbert awaited the first words from the king's lips with as much impatience as Philippe and Aramis did from their place of observation. Are you aware what is the usual and natural consequence of all this, Monsieur Colbert? Said the king, after a few moments' reflection. No, sire, I do not know. Well, then, the fact of the appropriation of the 13 millions, if it can be proved. But it is so already. I mean, if it were to be declared and certified, M. Colbert, I think it will be tomorrow, if your Majesty, were we not under M. Fouquet's roof, you're going to say, perhaps, replied the king, with something of nobility in his demeanor. The king is in his own palace, wherever he may be, especially in houses which the royal money has constructed. I think, said Philippe in a low tone to Aramis, that the architect who planned this dome ought, anticipating the use it could be put to at a future opportunity, so I contrived that it might be made to fall upon the heads of scoundrels such as M. Colbert. I think so, too, replied Aramis. But M. Colbert is so very near the king at this moment. That is true, and that would open succession, of which your younger brother would reap all the advantage, Monseigneur. But stay, let's keep quiet and go on listening. We shall not have long to listen, said the young prince. Why not, Monseigneur? Because if I were king, I should make no further reply. And what would you do? I should wait until tomorrow morning to give myself time for reflection. Louis XIV at last raised his eyes, and finding Colbert attentively waiting for his next remarks, said hastily, changing the conversation, M. Colbert, I perceive it is getting very late, and I shall now retire to bed. By tomorrow morning I shall have made up my mind. Very good, sire, returned Colbert, greatly incensed, although he restrained himself in the presence of the king. The king made a gesture of adieu, and Colbert withdrew a respectful bow. My attendants, cried the king, and, as they entered the apartment, Philippe was about to quit his post of observation. A moment longer, said Aramis to him, with his accustomed gentleness of manner. What has just now taken place is only a detail, and tomorrow we shall have no occasion to think anything more about it. But the ceremony of the king's retiring to rest, the etiquette observed in addressing the king, that indeed is of the greatest importance. Learn, sire, and study well how you ought to go to bed of a night. Look. Chapter 15. Colbert. History will tell us, or rather history has told us, of the various events of following day, of the splendid fetes given by the superintendent to his sovereign. Nothing but amusement and delight was allowed to prevail throughout the whole of the following day. There was a promenade, a banquet, a comedy to be acted, and a comedy, too, in which, to his great amazement, Porthos recognized M. Coquelin de Voliere as one of the actors, in the piece called Les Fâcheux. Full of preoccupation, however, from the scene of the previous evening, and hardly recovered from the effects of the poison which Colbert had then administered to him, the king, during the whole of the day, so brilliant in its effects, so full of unexpected and startling novelties, in which all the wonders of the Arabian Nights' entertainments seemed to be reproduced for his especial amusement. The king, we say, showed himself cold, reserved, and taciturn. History will tell us, or rather history has told us, of the various events of the following day, of the splendid fetes given by the superintendent to his sovereign. Nothing could smooth the frowns upon his face. Everyone who observed him noticed that a deep feeling of resentment, of remote origin, increased by slow degrees, as the source becomes a river, thanks to the thousand threads of water that increase its body, was keenly alive in the depths of the king's heart. Towards the middle of the day only did he begin to resume a little serenity of manner, and by that time he had, in all probability, made up his mind. Aramis, who followed him step by step in his thoughts, as in his walk, concluded that the event he was expecting would not be long before it was announced. This time Colbert seemed to walk in concert with the Bishop of Vannes, and had he received for every annoyance which he inflicted on the king a word of direction from Aramis, he could not have done better. During the whole of the day the king, who, in all probability, wished to free himself from some of the thoughts which disturbed his mind, seemed to seek La Valliere's society as actively as he seemed to show his anxiety to flee that of M. Colbert or M. Fouquet. The evening came. The king had expressed a wish not to walk in the park until after cards in the evening. In the interval between supper and the promenade, cards and dice were introduced. The king won 1,000 pistoles, and having won them, put them in his pocket, and then rose, saying, "And now, gentlemen, to the park." He found the ladies of the court were already there. The king, we have before observed, had won 1,000 pistoles and had put them in his pocket, but M. Fouquet had somehow contrived to lose 10,000, so that among the courtiers there was still left 190,000 francs profit to divide, a circumstance which made the countenances of the courtiers and the officers of the king's household the most joyous countenances in the world. It was not the same, however, with the king's face, for, notwithstanding the successive play, to which he was by no means insensible, there still remained a slight shade of dissatisfaction. Colbert was waiting for or upon him at the corner of one of the avenues. He was most probably waiting there in consequence of a rendezvous which had been given him by the king, as Louis XIV, who had avoided him, or who had seemed to avoid him, suddenly made him a sign, and they then struck into the depth of the park together. But La Valliere, too, had observed the king's gloomy aspect and kindling glances. She had remarked this, and as nothing which lay hidden or smoldering in his heart was hidden from the gaze of her affection, she understood that this repressed wrath menaced someone. She prepared to withstand the current of his vengeance and intercede like an angel of mercy, overcome by sadness, nervously agitated. Deeply distressed at having been so long separated from her lover, disturbed at the sight of the emotion she had divined, she accordingly presented herself to the king with an embarrassed aspect, which in his indisposition of mind the king interpreted unfavorably. Then, as they were alone, nearly alone, inasmuch as Colbert, as soon as he perceived a young girl approaching, had stopped and drawn back a dozen paces, the king advanced towards La Valliere and took her by the hand. "Mademoiselle," he said to her, "should I be guilty of an indiscretion if I would inquire if you were indisposed? For you seem to breathe as if you were oppressed by some secret cause of uneasiness, and your eyes are filled with tears." "Oh, sire, if I be indeed so, and if my eyes are indeed full of tears, I am sorrowful only at the sadness which seems to oppress your majesty." "My sadness? You are mistaken, mademoiselle. No, it is not sadness I experience." "What is it, then, sire?" "Humiliation." "Humiliation? Oh, sire, what a word for you to use." "I mean, mademoiselle, that wherever I may happen to be, no one else ought to be the master. Well, then, look round you on every side, and judge whether I am not eclipsed, I, the King of France, before the monarch of these wide domains. Oh," he continued, clenching his hands and teeth, "when I think that this king—" "Well, sire," said Louise, terrified, "that this king is a faithless, unworthy servant, who grows proud and self-sufficient upon the strength of property that belongs to me and which he has stolen. And therefore I am about to change this impudent minister's fate into sorrow and mourning, of which the nymph of Vaux, as the poets say, shall not soon lose a remembrance." "Oh, your majesty! Well, mademoiselle, are you about to take M. Fouquet's part?" said Louis impatiently. "No, sire, I will only ask whether you are well informed. Your majesty has more than once learned the value of accusations made at court." Louis XIV made a sign for Colbert to approach. "Speak, Monsieur Colbert," said the young prince, "for I almost believe that Mademoiselle de la Valliere has need of your assistance before she can put any faith in the king's word. Tell mademoiselle what M. Fouquet has done, and you, mademoiselle, will perhaps have the kindness to listen. It will not be long." Why did Louis XIV insist upon it in such a manner? A very simple reason. His heart was not at rest. His mind was not thoroughly convinced. He imagined there lay some dark, hidden, tortuous intrigue behind these 13 millions of francs, and he wished that the pure heart of La Valliere, which had revolted at the idea of theft or robbery, should approve, even were it only by a single word, the resolution he had taken, and which, nevertheless, he hesitated before carrying into execution. "Speak, monsieur," said La Valliere to Colbert, who had advanced. "Speak. Since the king wishes me to listen to you, tell me, what is the crime with which M. Fouquet is charged?" "Oh, not very heinous, mademoiselle," he returned. "A mere abuse of confidence." "Speak, speak, Colbert, and when you have related it, leave us and go and inform M. d'Artagnan that I have certain orders to give him." "M. d'Artagnan, sire!" exclaimed La Valliere. "But why send for M. d'Artagnan? I entreat you to tell me." "Pardieu, in order to arrest this haughty, arrogant titan who, true to his menace, threatens to scale my heaven." "Arrest M. Fouquet, you say? Ah, does that surprise you? In his own house. Why not? If he be guilty, he is as guilty in his own house as anywhere else. M. Fouquet, who at this moment is ruining himself for his sovereign. In plain truth, mademoiselle, it seems as if you were defending this traitor." Colbert began to chuckle silently. The king turned round at the sound of this suppressed mirth. "Sire," said La Valliere, "it is not M. Fouquet I am defending. It is yourself. Me! You are defending me? Sire, you would dishonor yourself if you were to give such an order. Dishonor myself, murmured the king, turning pale with anger. In plain truth, mademoiselle, you show a strange persistence in what you say. If I do, sire, my only motive is that of serving your majesty, replied the noble-hearted girl. For that I would sacrifice my very life without the least reserve. Colbert seemed inclined to grumble and complain. La Valliere, that timid, gentle lamb, turned round upon him, and with a glance like lightning imposed silence upon him. Monsieur, she said, when the king acts well, whether, in doing so, he does either myself or those who belong to me an injury, I have nothing to say, but would the king confer a benefit either upon me or mine, and if he acted badly, I should tell him so. But it appears to me, mademoiselle, Colbert ventured to say, that I too love the king. Yes, Monseigneur, we both love him, but each in a different manner, replied La Valliere, with such an accent that the heart of the young king was powerfully affected by it. I love him so deeply that the whole world is aware of it, so purely that the king himself does not doubt my affection. He is my king and my master. I am the least of all his servants. But whoso touches his honor assails my life. Therefore I repeat that they dishonor the king who advised him to arrest M. Fouquet under his own roof. Colbert hung down his head, for he felt that the king had abandoned him. However, as he bent his head, he murmured, Mademoiselle, I have only one word to say. Do not say it then, monsieur, for I would not listen to it. Besides, what could you have to tell me? That M. Fouquet has been guilty of certain crimes? I believe he has, because the king has said so, and from the moment the king said, I think so, I have no occasion for other lips to say, I affirm it. But were M. Fouquet the vilest of men, I should say aloud, M. Fouquet's person is sacred to king because he is the guest of M. Fouquet. Were his house a den of thieves, were Vaux a cave of coiners or robbers, his home is sacred, his palace is inviolable, since his wife is living in it, and that is an asylum which even executioners would not dare to violate. La Valliere paused and was silent. In spite of himself, the king could not but admire her. He was overpowered by the passionate energy of her voice, by the nobleness of the cause she advocated. Colbert yielded, overcome by the inequality of the struggle. At last the king breathed again more freely, shook his head, and held out his hand to La Valliere. Mademoiselle, he said gently, why do you decide against me? Do you know what this wretched fellow will do if I give him time to breathe again? Is he not a prey which will always be within your grasp? Should he escape and take to flight? Exclaimed Colbert. Well, monsieur, it will always remain on record, to the king's eternal honor, that he allowed M. Fouquet to flee, and the more guilty he may have been, the greater will the king's honor and glory appear, compared with such unnecessary misery and shame. Louis kissed La Valliere's hand, as he knelt before her. I am lost, thought Colbert, then suddenly his face brightened up again. Oh, no, old fox, not yet, he said to himself. And while the king, protected from observation by the thick covert of an enormous lime, pressed La Valliere to his breast with all the ardor of ineffable affection, Colbert tranquilly fumbled among the papers in his pocketbook and drew out of it a paper folded in the form of a letter, somewhat yellow, perhaps, but one that must have been most precious, since the intendant smiled as he looked at it. He then bent a look, full of hatred, upon the charming group which the young girl and the king formed together, a group revealed but for a moment as the light of the approaching torches shone upon it. Louis noticed the light reflected upon La Valliere's white dress. Leave me, Louise, he said, for someone is coming. Mademoiselle, someone is coming, cried Colbert, to expedite the young girl's departure. Louise disappeared rapidly among the trees, and then as the king, who had been on his knees before the young girl, was rising from his humble posture, Colbert exclaimed, Ah, Mademoiselle de la Valliere has let something fall. What is it? Inquired the king. A paper, a letter, something white. Look there, sire. The king stooped down immediately and picked up the letter, crumpling it in his hand as he did so, and at the same moment the torches arrived, inundating the blackness of the scene with a flood of light as bright as day. Chapter 16. Jealousy. The torches we had just referred to, the eager attention everyone displayed, and the new ovation paid to the king by Fouquet arrived in time to suspend the effect or resolution which La Valliere had already considerably shaken in Louis XIV's heart. He looked at Fouquet with a feeling almost of gratitude for having given La Valliere an opportunity of showing herself so generously disposed, so powerful in the influence she exercised over his heart. The moment of the last and greatest display had arrived. Hardly had Fouquet conducted the king toward the chateau, when a mass of fire burst from the dome of Vaux, with a prodigious uproar, pouring a flood of dazzling cataracts of rays on every side, and illumining the remotest corners of the gardens. The fireworks began. Colbert, at 20 paces from the king, who was surrounded and faded by the owner of Vaux, seemed, by the obstinate persistence of his gloomy thoughts, to do his utmost to recall Louis's attention, which the magnificence of the spectacle was already, in his opinion, too easily diverting. Suddenly, just as Louis was on the point of holding it out to Fouquet, he perceived in his hand the paper which, as he believed, La Valliere had dropped at his feet as she hurried away. The still stronger magnet of love drew the young prince's attention towards a souvenir of his idol, and by the brilliant light, which increased momentarily in beauty and drew from the neighboring villages loud cheers of admiration, the king read the letter, which he supposed was a loving and tender epistle La Valliere had destined for him. But as he read it, a death-like pallor stole over his face, an expression of deep-seated wrath, illumined by the many-colored fire which gleamed so brightly, soaringly around the scene, produced a terrible spectacle which everyone would have shuddered at, could they only have read into his heart, now torn by the most stormy and most bitter passions. There was no truce for him now, influenced as he was by jealousy and mad passion. From the very moment when the dark truth was revealed to him, every gentler feeling seemed to disappear. Pity, kindness of consideration, the religion of hospitality, all were forgotten in the bitter pang which wrung his heart. He, still too weak to hide his sufferings, was almost on the point of uttering a cry of alarm and calling his guards to gather round him. This letter which Colbert had thrown down at the king's feet, the reader has doubtlessly guessed, was the same that had disappeared with the porter Toby at Fontainebleau, after the attempt which Fouquet had made upon La Valliere's heart. Fouquet saw the king's pallor and was far from guessing the evil. Colbert saw the king's anger and rejoiced inwardly at the approach of the storm. Fouquet's voice drew the young prince from his wrathful reverie. "What is the matter, sire?" inquired the superintendent, with an expression of graceful interest. Louis made a violent effort over himself, as he replied, "Nothing. I am afraid your majesty is suffering." "I am suffering, and have already told you so, monsieur, but it is nothing." And the king, without waiting for the termination of the fireworks, turned towards the chateau. Fouquet accompanied him, and the whole court followed, leaving the remains of the fireworks consuming for their own amusement. The superintendent endeavored again to question Louis XIV, but did not succeed in obtaining a reply. He imagined there had been some misunderstanding between Louis and La Valliere in the park, which had resulted in a slight quarrel, and that the king, who was not ordinarily sulky by disposition, but completely absorbed by his passion for La Valliere, had taken a dislike to everyone because his mistress had shown herself offended with him. This idea was sufficient to console him. He had even a friendly and kindly smile for the young king, when the latter wished him good night. This, however, was not all the king had to submit to. He was obliged to undergo the usual ceremony, which on that evening was marked by close adherence to the strictest etiquette. The next day was the one fixed for departure. It was but proper that the guests should thank their host and show him a little attention in return for the expenditure of his 12 millions. The only remark approaching amiability which the king could find to say to M. Fouquet as he took leave of him were in these words: "M. Fouquet, you shall hear from me. Be good enough to desire M. D'Artagnan to come here." But the blood of Louis XIV, who had so profoundly dissimulated his feelings, boiled in his veins, and he was perfectly willing to order M. Fouquet to be put an end to with the same readiness, indeed, as his predecessor had caused the assassination of Le Marechal d'Ancre, and so he disguised the terrible resolution he had formed beneath one of those royal smiles which, like lightning flashes, indicated coups d'etat. Fouquet took the king's hand and kissed it, Louis shuddered throughout his whole frame, but allowed Fouquet to touch his hand with his lips. 5 minutes afterwards, D'Artagnan, to whom the royal order had been communicated, entered Louis XIV's apartment. Aramis and Philippe were in theirs, still eagerly attentive and still listening with all their ears. The king did not even give the captain of the Musketeers time to approach his armchair, but ran forward to meet him. "Take care," he exclaimed, "that no one enters here." "Very good, sire," replied the captain, whose glance had for a long time past analyzed the stormy indications on the royal countenance. He gave the necessary order at the door, but, returning to the king, he said, "Is there something fresh the matter, your majesty?" "How many men have you here?" inquired the king, without making any other reply to a question addressed to him. "What for, sire?" "How many men have you, I say?" repeated the king, stamping upon the ground with his foot. "I have the Musketeers." "Well, and what others?" 20 guards and 13 Swiss. "How many men will be required to—" "To do what, sire?" replied the Musketeer, opening his large, calm eyes. "To arrest M. Fouquet." D'Artagnan fell back a step. "To arrest M. Fouquet," he burst forth. "Are you going to tell me that it is impossible?" exclaimed the king, in tones of cold, vindictive passion. "I never say that anything is impossible," replied D'Artagnan, wounded to quick. "Very well, do it, then." D'Artagnan turned on his heel and made his way toward the door. It was but a short distance, and he cleared in 6 paces. When he reached it, he suddenly paused and said, "Your Majesty will forgive me, but in order to effect this arrest, I should like written directions." "For what purpose? And since when has the king's word been insufficient for you?" "Because the word of a king, when it springs from a feeling of anger, may possibly change when the feeling changes." "A truce to set phrases, monsieur. You have another thought besides that?" "Oh, I, at least, have certain thoughts and ideas, which, unfortunately, others have not," D'Artagnan replied impertinently. The king, in the tempest of his wrath, hesitated, and drew back in the face of D'Artagnan's frank courage, just as a horse crouches on his haunches under the strong hand of a bold and experienced rider. "What is your thought?" he exclaimed. "This, sire," replied D'Artagnan. "You cause a man to be arrested when you're still under his roof, and passion is alone the cause of that. When your anger shall have passed, you will regret what you have done, and then I wish to be in a position to show you your signature. If that, however, should fail to be a reparation, it will at least show us that the king was wrong to lose his temper." "Wrong to lose his temper," cried the king in a loud, passionate voice. "Did not my father, my grandfathers too, before me, lose their temper at times, in heaven's name? The king your father and the king your grandfather never lost their temper, except when under protection of their own palace. The king is master, wherever he may be. That is a flattering, complimentary phrase which cannot proceed from any one but M. Colbert, but it happens not to be the truth. The king is at home in every man's house when he has driven its owner out of it. The king bit his lips, but said nothing. "Can it be possible?" said D'Artagnan. "Here is a man who is positively ruining himself in order to please you, and you wish to have him arrested. Mordieux! Sire, if my name was Fouquet, and people treated me in that manner, I would swallow at a single gulp all sorts of fireworks and other things, and I would set fire to them, and send myself and everybody else in blown-up atoms to the sky. But it is all the same. It is your wish, and it shall be done." "Go," said the king. "But have you men enough? Do you suppose I am going to take a whole host to help me? Arrest M. Fouquet. Why, that is so easy that a very child might do it. It is like drinking a glass of wormwood. One makes an ugly face, and that is all. If he defends himself, it is not at all likely. Defend himself when such extreme harshness as you are going to practice makes the man a very martyr. Nay, I am sure that if he has 1,000,000 of francs left, which I very much doubt, he would be willing enough to give it in order to have such a termination as this. But what does that matter? It shall be done at once." "Stay," said the king. "Do not make his arrest a public affair. That will be more difficult." "Why so?" "Because nothing is easier than go up to M. Fouquet in the midst of 1,000 enthusiastic guests who surround him and say, 'In the king's name, I arrest you.' but to go up to him, to turn him first one way and then another, to drive him up into one of the corners of the chessboard in such a way that he cannot escape, to take him away from his guests and keep him a prisoner for you, without one of them, alas, having heard anything about it. That, indeed, is a genuine difficulty, the greatest of all in truth, and I hardly see how it is to be done. You had better say it is impossible, and you will have finished much sooner. Heaven help me, but I seem to be surrounded by people who prevent me doing what I wish. I do not prevent your doing anything. Have you indeed decided? Take care of M. Fouquet, until I shall have made up my mind by tomorrow morning. That shall be done, sire. And return when I rise in the morning for further orders, and now leave me to myself. You do not even want M. Colbert, then, said the musketeer, firing his last shot as he was leaving the room. The king started, with his whole mind fixed on the thought of revenge. He had forgotten the cause and substance of the offense. No, no one, he said. No one here. Leave me. D'Artagnan quitted the room. The king closed the door with his own hands and began to walk up and down his apartment at a furious pace, like a wounded bull in an arena, trailing from his horn the colored streamers and the iron darts. At last he began to take comfort in the expression of his violent feelings. Miserable wretch that he is! Not only does he squander my finances, but with his ill-gotten plunder he corrupts secretaries, friends, generals, artists, and all, and tries to rob me of the one to whom I am most attached. This is the reason that perfidious girl so boldly took his part. Gratitude. And who can tell whether it was not a stronger feeling, love itself? He gave himself up for a moment to the bitterest reflections. A satyr, he thought, with that abhorrent hate with which young men regard those more advanced in life, who still think of love. A man who has never found opposition or resistance in anyone, who lavishes his gold and jewels in every direction, and who retains a staff of painters in order to take the portraits of his mistresses in the costume of goddesses. The king trembled with passion as he continued. He pollutes and profanes everything that belongs to me. He destroys everything that is mine. He will be my death at last, I know. That man is too much for me. He is my mortal enemy, but he shall forthwith fall. I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. And as he pronounced these words, he struck the arm of the chair in which he was sitting violently, over and over again, and then rose like one in an epileptic fit. Tomorrow, tomorrow. Oh, happy day, he murmured. When the sun rises, no other rival shall that brilliant king of space possess but me. That man shall fall so low that when people look at the abject ruin my anger shall have wrought, they will be forced to confess at last, and at least that I am indeed greater than he. The king, who was incapable of mastering his emotions any longer, knocked over with a blow of his fist a small table placed close to his bedside, and in the very bitterness of anger, almost weeping and half suffocated, he threw himself on his bed, dressed as he was, and bit the sheets in his extremity of passion, trying to find repose of body at least there. The bed creaked beneath his weight, and with the exception of a few broken sounds, emerging or, one might say, exploding from his overburdened chest, absolute silence soon reigned in the chamber of Morpheus. Chapter 17. High Treason. The ungovernable fury which took possession of the king at the sight and at the perusal of Fouquet's letter to La Valliere, by degrees subsided into a feeling of pain and extreme weariness. Youth, invigorated by health and lightness of spirits, requiring soon that what it loses should be immediately restored. Youth knows not those endless, sleepless nights which enable us to realize the fable of the vulture unceasingly feeding on Prometheus. In cases with a man of middle life, in his acquired strength of will and purpose, and the old, in their state of natural exhaustion, find incessant augmentation of their bitter sorrow. A young man, surprised by the sudden appearance of misfortune, weakens himself in sighs and groans and tears, directly struggling with his grief, and is thereby far sooner overthrown by the inflexible enemy with whom he is engaged. Once overthrown, his struggles cease. Louis could not hold out more than a few minutes, at the end of which he had ceased to clench his hands, and scorch in fancy with his looks the invisible objects of his hatred. He soon ceased to attack with his violent imprecations not M. Fouquet alone, but even La Valliere herself. From fury he subsided into despair, and from despair to prostration. After he had thrown himself for a few minutes to and fro convulsively on his bed, his nerveless arms fell quietly down, His head lay languidly on his pillow, his limbs, exhausted with excessive emotion, still trembled occasionally, agitated by muscular contractions, while from his breast faint and infrequent sighs still issued. Morpheus, the tutelary deity of the apartment, toward whom Louis raised his eyes, wearied by his anger and reconciled by his tears, showered down upon him the sleep-inducing poppies with which his hands are ever filled. So presently the monarch closed his eyes and fell asleep. Then it seemed to him, as it often happens in that first sleep, so light and gentle, which raises the body above the couch and the soul above the earth, it seemed to him, we say, as if the god Morpheus, painted on the ceiling, looked at him with eyes resembling human eyes, that something shone brightly and moved to and fro in the dome above the sleeper, that the crowd of terrible dreams which thronged together in his brain, and which were interrupted for a moment, half revealed a human face, with a hand resting against the mouth, and an attitude of deep and absorbed meditation. And strange enough, too, this man bore so wonderful a resemblance to the king himself, that Louis fancied he was looking at his own face reflected in a mirror, with the exception, however, that the face was saddened by a feeling of the profoundest pity. Then it seemed to him as if the dome gradually retired, escaping from his gaze, and that the figures and attributes painted by Lebrun became darker and darker as the distance became more and more remote. A gentle, easy movement, as regular as that by which a vessel plunges beneath the waves, had succeeded to the immovableness of the bed. Doubtless the king was dreaming, and in this dream the crown of gold, which fastened the curtains together, seemed to recede from his vision, just as the dome, to which it remained suspended, had done, so that the winged genius which, with both its hand, supported the crown, seemed, though vainly so, to call upon the king, who was fast disappearing from it. The bed still sunk. Louis, with his eyes open, could not resist the deception of this cruel hallucination. At last, as the light of the royal chamber faded away into darkness and gloom, something cold, gloomy, and inexplicable in its nature seemed to infect the air. No paintings, nor gold, nor velvet hangings were visible any longer, nothing but walls of dull gray color, which the increasing gloom made darker every moment. And yet the bed still continued to descend, and after a minute, which seemed in its duration almost an age to the king, it reached a stratum of air, black and chill as death, and then it stopped. The king could no longer see the light in his room, except as from the bottom of a well we can see the light of day. I am under the influence of some atrocious dream, he thought. It is time to awaken from it. Come, let me wake. Everyone has experienced the sensation the above remark conveys. There is hardly a person who, in the midst of a nightmare whose influence is suffocating, has not said to himself, by the help of that light which still burns in the brain when every human light is extinguished, it is nothing but a dream, after all. This was precisely what Louis XIV said to himself, but when he said, "Come, come, wake up," he perceived that not only was he already awake, but still more, that he had his eyes open also. And then he looked all round him. On his right hand and on his left 2 armed men stood in stolid silence, each wrapped in a huge cloak, and the face covered with a mask. One of them held a small lamp in his hand, whose glimmering light revealed the saddest picture a king could look upon. Louis could not help saying to himself that his dream still lasted, and that all he had to do to cause it to disappear was to move his arms or say something aloud. He darted from his bed and found himself upon the damp, moist ground. Then, addressing himself to the man who held the lamp in his hand, he said, "What is this, monsieur, and what is the meaning of this jest?" "It is no jest," replied in a deep voice the masked figure that held the lantern. "Do you belong to M. Fouquet?" inquired the king, greatly astonished at his situation. "It matters very little to whom we belong," said the phantom. "We are your masters now. That is sufficient." The king, more impatient than intimidated, turned to the other masked figure. "If this is a comedy," he said, "you will tell M. Fouquet that I find unseemly and improper, and that I command it should cease." The second masked person to whom the king had addressed himself was a man of huge stature and vast circumference. He held himself erect and motionless as any block of marble. "Well," added the king, stamping his foot, "you do not answer." "We do not answer you, my good monsieur," said the giant in a stentorian voice, "because there is nothing to say." "At least, tell me what you want," exclaimed Louis, folding his arms with a passionate gesture. "You will know by and by," replied the man who held the lamp. "In the meantime, tell me where I am." "Look." Louis looked all round him, but by the light of the lamp which the masked figure raised for the purpose, he could perceive nothing but the damp walls which glistened here and there with the slimy traces of snail. "Oh, oh, a dungeon!" cried the king. "No, a subterranean passage." "Which leads?" "Will you be good enough to follow us?" "I shall not stir from hence," cried the king. "If you are obstinate, my dear young friend," replied the taller of the two, "I will lift you up in my arms and roll you up in your own cloak, and if you should happen to be stifled, why, so much the worse for you." As he said this, he disengaged from beneath his cloak a hand to which Milo Crotona would have envied him possession on the day when he had that unhappy idea of rending his last oak. The king dreaded violence, for he could well believe that the two men into whose power he had fallen had not gone so far with any idea of drawing back, and that they would consequently be ready to proceed to extremities, if necessary. He shook his head and said, "It seems I have fallen into the hands of a couple of assassins. Move on, then." Neither of the men answered a word to this remark. The one who carried the lantern walked first. The king followed him, while the second masked figure closed the procession. In this manner they passed along a winding gallery of some length, with as many staircases leading out of it as are to be found in the mysterious and gloomy palaces of Radcliffe's creation. All these windings and turnings, through which the king heard the sound of running water over his head, ended at last in a long corridor closed by an iron door. The figure with the lamp opened the door with one of the keys he wore suspended at his girdle, where, during the whole of the brief journey, the king had heard them rattle. As soon as the door was open and admitted the air, Louis recognized the balmy odors that trees exhale in hot summer nights. He paused hesitatingly for a moment or two, but the huge sentinel who followed him thrust him out of the subterranean passage. "Another blow," said the king, turning toward the one who had just had the audacity to touch his sovereign. "What do you intend to do with the King of France?" "Try to forget that word," replied the man with the lamp, in a tone which as little admitted of a reply as one of the famous decrees of Minos. "You deserve to be broken on the wheel for the words that you have just made use of," said the giant, as he extinguished the lamp his companion handed to him. "But the king is too kind-hearted." Louis, at that threat, made so sudden a movement that it seemed as if he meditated flight. But the giant's hand was in a moment placed on his shoulder and fixed him motionless where he stood. "But tell me, at least, where we are going," said the king. "Come," replied the former of the two men, with a kind of respect in his manner, and leading his prisoner toward a carriage which seemed to be in waiting. The carriage was completely concealed amid the trees. Two horses, with their feet fettered, were fastened by a halter to the lower branches of a large oak. "Get in," said the same man, opening the carriage door and letting down the step. The king obeyed, seated himself at the back of the carriage, the padded door which was shut and locked immediately upon him and his guide. As for the giant, he cut the fastenings by which the horses were bound, harnessed them himself, and mounted on the box of the carriage, which was unoccupied. The carriage set off immediately at a quick trot, turned into the road to Paris, and in the forest of Senart found a relay of horses fastened to the trees in the same manner the first horses had been, and without a postilion. The man on the box changed the horses, and continued to follow the road towards Paris with the same rapidity, so that they entered the city about 3 o'clock in the morning. The carriage proceeded along the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, and, after having called out to the sentinel, by the king's order, the driver conducted the horses into the circular enclosure of the Bastille, looking out upon the courtyard, called La Cour du Gouvernement. There the horses drew up, reeking with sweat, at the flight of steps, and a sergeant of the guard ran forward. "Go and wake the governor," said the coachman in a voice of thunder. With the exception of this voice, which might have been heard at the entrance of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, everything remained as calm in the carriage as in the prison. 10 minutes afterwards, M. de Baismos appeared in his dressing gown on the threshold of the door. "What is the matter now?" he asked, "and whom have you brought me there?" The man with the lantern opened the carriage door and said 2 or 3 words to the one who acted as driver, who immediately got down from his seat, took up a short musket which he kept under his feet, and placed its muzzle on his prisoner's chest. "And fire at once if he speaks," added aloud the man who alighted from the carriage. Very good, replied his companion, without another remark. With this recommendation, the person who had accompanied the king in the carriage ascended the flight of steps, at the top of which the governor was awaiting him. Monsieur d'Herblay, said the latter. Hush, said Aramis. Let us go into your room. Good heavens! What brings you here at this hour? A mistake, my dear Monsieur de Bazemose, Aramis replied quietly. It appears that you were quite right the other day. What about? Inquired the governor. About the order of release, my dear friend. Tell me what you mean, monsieur. No, monseigneur, said the governor, almost suffocated by surprise and terror. It is a very simple affair. You remember, dear de Bazemose, that an order of release was sent to you. Yes, from Marchiali. Very good. We both thought that it was from Marchiali. Certainly. You will recollect, however, that I would not credit it, but that you compel me to believe it. Oh, Bazemose, my good fellow, what a word to make use of. Strongly recommended, that was all. Strongly recommended, yes. Strongly recommended to give him up to you, and that you carried him off with you in your carriage. Well, my dear Monsieur de Bazemose, it was a mistake. It was discovered at the ministry, so that I now bring you an order from the king to set at liberty Selden. That poor Selden fellow, you know. Selden, are you sure this time? Well, read it yourself, added Aramis, handing him the order. Why, said Bazemose, this order is the very same that has already passed through my hands. Indeed, it is the very one I assured you I saw the other evening. Parbleu, I recognize it by the blot of ink. I do not know whether it is that, but all I know is that I bring it for you. But then, what about the other? What other? Marchiali. I have got him here with me. But that is not enough for me. I require a new order to take him back again. Don't talk such nonsense. My dear Bazemose, you talk like a child. Where is the order you received respecting Marchiali? Bazemose ran to his iron chest and took it out. Aramis seized hold of it, coolly tore it in 4 pieces, held them to the lamp, and burnt them. Good heavens! What are you doing? Exclaimed Bazemose in an extremity of terror. Look at your position quietly, my good governor, said Aramis with imperturbable self-possession, and you will see how very simple the whole affair is. You no longer possess any order justifying Marchiali's release. I am a lost man. Far from it, my good fellow, since I have brought Marchiali back to you, and all accordingly is just the same as if he had never left. Ah, said the governor, completely overcome by terror. Plain enough, you see, and you will go and show him up immediately. I should think so, indeed. And you will hand over this Selden to me, whose liberation is authorized by this order. Do you understand? Aye. You do understand, I see, said Aramis. Very good. Bazemose clapped his hands together. But why, at all events, after having taken Marchiali away from me, do you bring him back again? Cried the unhappy governor, in a paroxysm of terror and completely dumbfounded. For a friend such as you are, said Aramis, for so devoted a servant, I have no secrets. And he put his mouth close to Bazemose's ear as he said, in a low tone of voice, You know the resemblance between that unfortunate fellow and the king, yes. Very good. The first use that Marchiali made of his liberty was to persist. Can you guess what? How is it likely I should guess? To persist in saying that he was king of France, to dress himself up in clothes like those of the king, and then pretend to assume that he was a king himself. Gracious heavens. That is the reason why I brought him back again. My dear friend, he is mad, and lets everyone see how mad he is. What is to be done, then? That is very simple. Let no one hold any communication with him. You understand that when his peculiar style of madness came to the king's ears, the king, who had pitied his terrible affliction, and saw that all his kindness had been repaid by black ingratitude, became perfectly furious. So that now, and remember this very distinctly, dear Monsieur de Bazemose, for it concerns you most closely, so that there is now, I repeat, sentence of death pronounced against all those who may allow him to communicate with anyone else but me or the king himself. You understand, Bazemose, sentence of death. You need not ask me whether I understand. And now, let us go down and conduct this poor devil back to his dungeon again, unless you prefer he should come up here. What would be the good of that? It would be better, perhaps, to enter his name in the prison book at once. Of course, certainly, not a doubt of it. In that case, have him up. Baisemeaux ordered the drums to be beaten and the bell to be rung, as a warning to everyone to retire, in order to avoid meeting a prisoner, about whom it was desired to observe a certain mystery. Then, when the passages were free, he went to take the prisoner from the carriage, at whose breast Porthos, faithful to the directions which had been given him, still kept his musket leveled. "Ah, is that you, miserable wretch?" cried the governor as soon as he perceived the king. "Very good, very good." And immediately, making the king get out of the carriage, he led him, still accompanied by Porthos, who had not taken off his mask, and Aramis, who again resumed his up the stairs, to the second bertigere, and opened the door of the room in which Philippe for 6 long years had bemoaned his existence. The king entered the cell without pronouncing a single word. He faltered in as limp and haggard as a rain-struck lily. Baisemeaux shut the door upon him, turned the key twice in the lock, and then returned to Aramis. "It is quite true," he said in a low tone, "that he bears a striking resemblance to the king, but less so than you said." "So that," said Aramis, "you would not have been deceived by the substitution of the one for the other?" "What a question! You are a most valuable fellow, Baisemeaux," said Aramis, "and now set Selden free." "Oh, yes, I was going to forget that. I will go and give orders at once." "Bah! Tomorrow will be time enough." "Tomorrow? Oh, no, this very minute." "Well, go off to your affairs. I will go away to mine. But it is quite understood, is it not?" "What is quite understood?" "That no one is to enter the prisoner's cell, except with an order from the king, an order which I will myself bring." "Quite so. Adieu, monseigneur." Aramis returned to his companion. "Now, Porthos, my good fellow, back again to Vaux, and as fast as possible. A man is light and easy enough when he has faithfully served his king, and in serving him save his country," said Porthos. "The horses will be as light as if our tissues were constructed of the wind of heaven. So let us be off." And the carriage, lightened of a prisoner who might well be, as he in fact was, very heavy in the sight of Aramis, passed across the drawbridge of the Bastille, which was raised again immediately behind it. Chapter 18. A night at the Bastille. Pain, anguish, and suffering in human life are always in proportion to the strength with which a man is endowed. We will not pretend to say that heaven always apportions to a man's capability of endurance the anguish with which he afflicts him, for that, indeed, would not be true, since heaven permits the existence of death, which is sometimes the only refuge open to those who are too closely pressed, too bitterly afflicted, as far as the body is concerned. Suffering is in proportion to the strength which has been accorded. In other words, the weak suffer more where the trial is the same than the strong. And what are the elementary principles, we may ask, that compose human strength? Is it not, more than anything else, exercise, habit, experience? We shall not even take the trouble to demonstrate this, for it is an axiom in morals, as in physics. When the young king, stupefied and crushed in every sense and feeling, found himself led to a cell in the Bastille, he fancied death itself is but a sleep, that it, too, has its dreams as well, that the bed had broken to the flooring of his room at Vaux, that death had resulted from the occurrence, and that, still carrying out his dream, the king, Louis XIV, now no longer living, was dreaming one of those horrors, impossible to realize in life, which is termed dethronement, imprisonment, an insult towards a sovereign who formerly wielded unlimited power. To be present at, an actual witness, too, of this bitterness of death, to float indecisively in an incomprehensible mystery between resemblance and reality, to hear everything, to see everything, without interfering in a single detail of agonizing suffering, was, so the king thought within himself, a torture far more terrible, since it might last forever. "Is this what is termed eternity, hell?" he murmured, at the moment the door was closed upon him, which we remember Baisemeaux had shut with his own hands. He did not even look round him, and in the room, leaning with his back against the wall, he allowed himself to be carried away by the terrible supposition that he was already dead as he closed his eyes, in order to avoid looking upon something even worse still. How can I have died? He said to himself, sick with terror. The bed might have been let down by some artificial means? But no, I do not remember to have felt a bruise, nor any shock either. Would they not rather have poisoned me at my meals, or with the fumes of wax, as they did my ancestress, Jeanne d'Albret? Suddenly, the chill of the dungeon seemed to fall like a wet cloak upon Louis's shoulders. I have seen, he said, my father lying dead upon his funeral couch, in his regal robes. That pale face, so calm and worn, those hands, once so skillful, lying nerveless by his side, those limbs stiffened by the icy grasp of death. Nothing there betokened a sleep that was disturbed by dreams. And yet, how numerous were the dreams which heaven might have sent that royal corpse, him whom so many others had preceded, hurried away by him into eternal death. No, that king was still the king. He was enthroned still upon that funeral couch, as upon a velvet armchair. He had not abdicated one title of his majesty. God, who had not punished him, will not punish me, who have done nothing. A strange sound attracted the young man's attention. He looked round him and saw on the mantelshelf, just below an enormous crucifix, coarsely painted in fresco on the wall, a rat of enormous size engaged in nibbling a piece of dry bread, but fixing all the time an intelligent and inquiring look upon the new occupant of the cell. The king could not resist a sudden impulse of fear and disgust. He moved back toward the door, uttering a loud cry, and as if he but needed this cry, which escaped from his breast almost unconsciously, to recognize himself, Louis knew that he was alive and in full possession of his natural senses. "A prisoner!" he cried. I, a prisoner!" He looked round him for a bell to summon someone to him. "There are no bells in the Bastille," he said, "and it is in the Bastille I am imprisoned. In what way can I have been made a prisoner? It must have been owing to a conspiracy of M. Fouquet. I have been drawn to Vaux, as to a snare. M. Fouquet cannot be acting alone in this affair. His agent, that voice I but just now heard, was M. de Herblay. I recognized it. Colbert was right, then. But what is Fouquet's object? To reign in my place instead? Impossible. Yet who knows, thought the king, relapsing into gloom again. Perhaps my brother, the Duc d'Orleans, is doing that which my uncle wished to do during the whole of his life against my father. But the queen, my mother too? And La Valliere? Oh, La Valliere. She will have been abandoned to Madame. Dear, dear girl. Yes, it must be so. They have shut her up as they have me. We are separated forever." And at this idea of separation, the poor lover burst into a flood of tears and sobs and groans. "There's a governor in this place," the king continued, in a fury of passion. "I will speak to him. I will summon him to me." He called. No voice replied to his. He seized hold of his chair and hurled it against the massive oaken door. The wood resounded against the door and awakened many a mournful echo in profound depths of the staircase. But from a human creature, none. This was a fresh proof for the king of the slight regard in which he was held at the Bastille. Therefore, when his first fit of anger had passed away, having remarked a barred window through which there passed a stream of light, lozenge-shaped, which must be, he knew, the bright orb of approaching day, Louis began to call out, at first gently enough, then louder and louder still, but no one replied. 20 other attempts which he made, one after another, obtained no other or better success. His blood began to boil within him and mount to his head. His nature was such that, accustomed to command, he trembled at the idea of disobedience. The prisoner broke the chair, which was too heavy for him to lift, and made use of it as a battering ram to strike against the door. He struck so loudly and so repeatedly that the perspiration soon began to pour down his face. The sound became tremendous and continuous. Certain stifled, smothered cries replied in different directions. This sound produced a strange effect upon the king. He paused to listen. It was the voice of the prisoners, formerly his victims, now his companions. The voices ascended like vapors through the thick ceilings and the massive walls, and rose in accusations against the author of this noise, as doubtless their sighs and tears accused, in whispered tones, the author of their captivity. After having deprived so many people of their liberty, the king came among them to rob them of their rest. This idea almost drove him mad. It redoubled his strength, or rather his will, bent upon obtaining some information or conclusion to the affair. With a portion of the broken chair, he recommenced the noise. At the end of an hour, Louis heard something in the corridor behind the door of his cell, and a violent blow, which was returned upon the door itself, made him cease his own. "Are you mad?" said a rude, brutal voice. "What is the matter with you this morning?" "This morning," thought the king, but he said aloud politely, "Monsieur, are you the governor of the Bastille?" "My good fellow, your head is out of sorts," replied the voice, "but that is no reason why you should make such a terrible disturbance. Be quiet, Mordieux." "Are you the governor?" the king inquired again. He heard a door on the corridor close. The jailer had just left, not condescending to reply a single word. When the king had assured himself of his departure, his fury knew no longer any bounds. As agile as a tiger, he leaped from the table to the window and struck the iron bars with all his might. He broke a pane of glass, the pieces of which fell clanking into the courtyard below. He shouted with increasing hoarseness, "The governor! The governor!" This excess lasted fully an hour, during which time he was in a burning fever. With his hair in disorder and matted on his forehead, his dress torn and covered with dust and plaster, his linen in shreds, the king never rested until his strength was utterly exhausted. And it was not until then that he clearly understood the pitiless thickness of the walls, the impenetrable nature of the cement, invincible to every influence but that of time, and that he possessed no other weapon but despair. He leaned his forehead against the door and let the feverish throbbings of his heart calm by degrees. It seemed as if one single additional pulsation would have made it burst. A moment will come when the food, which is given to the prisoners, will be brought to me. I shall then see someone. I shall speak to him and get an answer. And the king tried to remember at what hour the first repast of the prisoners was served at the Bastille. He was ignorant even of this detail. The feeling of remorse at this remembrance smote him like the thrust of a dagger, that he should have lived for 25 years a king, and in the enjoyment of every happiness, without having bestowed a moment's thought on the misery of those who had been unjustly deprived of their liberty. The king blushed for very shame. He felt that heaven, in permitting this fearful humiliation, did no more than render to man the same torture as had been inflicted by that man upon so many others. Nothing could be more efficacious for reawakening his mind to religious influences than the prostration of his heart and mind and soul beneath the feeling of such acute wretchedness. But Louis dared not even kneel in prayer to God to entreat him to terminate his bitter trial. "Heaven is right," he said. "Heaven acts wisely. It would be cowardly to pray to heaven for that which I have so often refused my own fellow creatures." He had reached the stage of his reflections, that is, of his agony of mind, when a similar noise was again heard behind his door, followed this time by the sound of the key in the lock, and of the bolts being withdrawn from their staples. The king bounded forward to be nearer to the person who was about to enter, but, suddenly reflecting that it was a movement unworthy of a sovereign, he paused, assumed a noble and calm expression, which for him was easy enough, and waited with his back turned towards the window, in order, to some extent, to conceal his agitation from the eyes of the person who was about to enter. It was only a jailer with a basket of provisions. The king looked at the man with restless anxiety, and waited until he spoke. "Ah," said the latter, "you have broken your chair. I said you had done so. Why, you've gone quite mad." "Monsieur," said the king, "be careful what you say. It will be a very serious affair for you." The jailer placed the basket on the table, and looked at his prisoner steadily. "What do you say?" he said. "Desire the governor to come to me," added the king, in accents full of calm and dignity. "Come, my boy," said the turnkey. "You have always been very quiet and reasonable, but you are getting vicious, it seems, and I wish you to know it in time. You have broken your chair and made a great disturbance. That is an offense punishable by imprisonment in one of the lower dungeons. Promise me not to begin over again, and I will not say a word about it to the governor." "I wish to see the governor," replied the king, still governing his passions. "He will send you off to one of the dungeons, I tell you. So take care. I insist upon it, do you hear? Ah, your eyes are becoming wild again. Very good. I shall take away your knife." And the jailer did what he said, quitted the prisoner, and closed the door, leaving the king more astounded, more wretched, more isolated than ever. It was useless, though he tried it. to make the same noise again on his door, and equally useless that he threw the plates and dishes out a window. Not a single sound was heard in recognition. 2 hours afterwards, he could not be recognized as a king, a gentleman, a man, a human being. He might rather be called a madman, tearing the door with his nails, trying to tear up the flooring of his cell, and uttering such wild and fearful cries that the old Bastille seemed to tremble to its very foundations for having revolted against its master. As for the governor, the jailer did not even think of disturbing him. The turnkeys and the sentinels had reported the occurrence to him. But what was the good of it? Were not these madmen common enough in such a prison? And were not the walls still stronger? M. de Baisemeaux, thoroughly impressed with what Aramis had told him, and in perfect conformity with the king's order, hoped only that one thing might happen, namely, that the madman Marchiali might be mad enough to hang himself to the canopy of his bed, or to one of the bars of the window. In fact, the prison was anything but a profitable investment for M. Baisemeaux, and became more annoying than agreeable to him. These complications of Selden and Marchiali, the complications first of setting at liberty and then imprisoning again, the complications arising from the strong likeness in question, had at last found a very proper denouement. Baisemeaux even thought he had remarked that D'Herblay himself was not altogether dissatisfied with the result. And then really, said Baisemeaux to his next in command, an ordinary prisoner is already unhappy enough in being a prisoner. He suffers quite enough, indeed, to induce one to hope, charitably enough, that his death may not be far distant. With still greater reason, accordingly, when the prisoner has gone mad and might by it make a terrible disturbance in Bastille, why, in such a case, it is not simply an act of mere charity to wish him dead. It would be almost a good and even commendable action, quietly to have him put out of his misery. And the good-natured governor thereupon sat down to his late breakfast. Chapter 19. The Shadow of M. Fouquet. D'Artagnan, still confused and oppressed by the conversation he had just had with the king, could not resist asking himself if he were really in possession of his senses, if he were really and truly a Vaux, if he, D'Artagnan, were really the captain of the Musketeers, and M. Fouquet the owner of the chateau in which Louis XIV was at that moment partaking of his hospitality. These reflections were not those of a drunken man, although everything was in prodigal profusion at Vaux, and the superintendent's wines had met with distinguished reception at the fete. The Gascon, however, was a man of calm self-possession, and no sooner did he touch his bright steel blade than he knew how to adopt morally the cold, keen weapon as his guide of action. "Well," he said, as he quitted the royal apartment, "I seem now to be mixed up historically with the destinies of the king and of the minister. It will be written that M. D'Artagnan, a younger son of Gascon family, placed his hand on the shoulder of M. Nicolas Fouquet, the superintendent of the finances of France. My descendants, if I have any, will flatter themselves with the distinction which this arrest will confer, just as the members of the Delignes family have done with regard to the estates of the poor Marechal d'Ancre. But the thing is, how best to execute the king's directions in a proper manner. Any man would know how to say to M. Fouquet, 'Your sword, monsieur.' But it is not every one who would be able to take care of M. Fouquet without others knowing anything about it. How am I to manage, then, so that le superintendent pass from the height of favor to the direst disgrace, that Vaux be turned into a dungeon for him, that after having been steeped to his lips, as it were, in all the perfumes and incense of Azurus, he is transferred to the gallows of Haman, in other words, of Enguerrand de Marigny?" And at this reflection, D'Artagnan's brow became clouded with perplexity. The musketeer had certain scruples on the matter, it must be admitted, to deliver up to death, for not a doubt existed that Louis hated Fouquet mortally. The man who had just shown himself so delightful and charming a host in every way was a real insult to one's conscience. "It almost seems," said D'Artagnan to himself, "that if I am not a poor, mean, miserable fellow, I should let Fouquet know the opinion the king has about him. Yet, if I betray my master's secret, I shall be a false-hearted, treacherous knave, a traitor, too, a crime provided for and punishable by military laws. So much so, indeed, that 20 times, in former days when wars were rife, I have seen many a miserable fellow strung up to a tree for doing, in but a small degree, what my scruples counsel me to undertake upon a great scale now. No, I think that a man of true readiness would ought to get out of this difficulty with more skill than that. And now, Let us admit that I do possess a little readiness of invention. It is not at all certain, though, for after having for 40 years absorbed so large a quantity, I shall be lucky if there were to be a pistol's worth left. D'Artagnan buried his head in his hands, tore at his mustache in sheer vexation, and added, "What could be the reason of M. Fouquet's disgrace? There seem to be three good ones. The first, because M. Colbert doesn't like him. The second, because he wished to fall in love with Mademoiselle de la Valliere. And lastly, because the king likes M. Colbert and loves Mademoiselle de la Valliere. Oh, he is lost. But shall I put my foot on his neck, I of all men, when he is falling a prey to the intrigues of a pack of women and clerks? For shame, if he be dangerous, I will lay him low enough. If, however, he be only persecuted, I will look on. I have come to such a decisive determination that neither king nor living man shall change my mind. If Athos were here, he would do as I have done. Therefore, instead of going in cold blood up to M. Fouquet and arresting him offhand and shutting him up altogether, I will try and conduct myself like a man who understands what good manners are. People will talk about it, of course, but they shall talk well of it. I am determined." And D'Artagnan, drawing by a gesture peculiar to himself his shoulder belt over his shoulder, went straight off to M. Fouquet, who, after he had taken leave of his guests, was preparing to retire for the night and to sleep tranquilly after the triumphs of the day. The air was still perfumed or infected, whichever way it may be considered, with the odors of the torches and the fireworks. The wax lights were dying away in their sockets. The flowers fell unfastened from the garlands. The groups of dancers and courtiers were separating in the salons. Surrounded by his friends, who complimented him and received his flattering remarks in return, the superintendent half closed his wearied eyes. He longed for rest and quiet. He sank upon the bed of laurels which had been heaped up for him for so many days past. It might almost have been said that he seemed bowed beneath the weight of the new debts which he had incurred for the purpose of giving the greatest possible honor to this fate. Fouquet had just retired to his room, still smiling, but more than half asleep. He could listen to nothing more. He could hardly keep his eyes open. His bed seemed to possess a fascinating and irresistible attraction for him. The god Morpheus, the presiding deity of the dome painted by Lebrun, had extended his influence over the adjoining rooms and showered down his most sleep-inducing poppies upon the master of the house. Fouquet, almost entirely alone, was being assisted by his valet de chambre to undress when M. D'Artagnan appeared at the entrance of the room. D'Artagnan had never been able to succeed in making himself common at the court, and notwithstanding he was seen everywhere and on all occasions, he never failed to produce an effect wherever and whenever he made his appearance. Such is a happy privilege of certain natures, which in that respect resemble either thunder or lightning. Everyone recognizes them. But their appearance never fails to arouse surprise and astonishment, and whenever they occur, the impression is always left that the last was the most conspicuous or most important. "What? M. D'Artagnan?" said Fouquet, who had already taken his right arm out of the sleeve of his doublet. "At your service," replied the Musketeer. "Come in, my dear M. D'Artagnan." "Thank you. Have you come to criticize the fate? You are ingenious enough in your criticisms, I know." "By no means. Are not your men looked after properly?" "In every way." "You are not comfortably lodged, perhaps?" "Nothing could be better." "In that case, I have to thank you for being so amiably disposed, and I must not fail to express my obligations to you for all your flattering kindness." These words were as much as to say, "My dear D'Artagnan, pray go to bed, since you have a bed to lie down on, and let me do the same." D'Artagnan did not seem to understand it. "Are you in a bed already?" he said to the superintendent. "Yes. Have you anything to say to me?" "Nothing, monsieur. Nothing at all." "You sleep in this room, then?" "Yes, as you see. You have given most charming fate to the king." "Do you think so?" "Oh, beautiful. Is the king pleased?" "Enchanted." "Did he desire you to say as much to me?" "He would not choose so unworthy a messenger, Monseigneur. You do not do yourself justice, Monsieur D'Artagnan." "Is that your bed there?" "Yes, but why do you ask? Are you not satisfied with your own?" "May I speak frankly to you?" "Most assuredly." "Well, then, I am not." Fouquet started, and then replied, Will you take my room, Monsieur d'Artagnan? What? Deprive you of it, Monseigneur? Never. What am I to do, then? Allow me to share yours with you. Fouquet looked at the musketeer fixedly. He said. You have just left the king. I have, Monseigneur. And the king wishes you to pass the night in my room? Monseigneur. Very well, Monsieur d'Artagnan. Very well. You are the master here. I assure you, Monseigneur, that I do not wish to abuse. Fouquet turned to his valet and said, Leave us. When the man had left, he said to D'Artagnan, You have something to say to me? Aye. A man of your superior intelligence cannot have come to talk with a man like myself at such an hour as the present, without grave motives. Do not interrogate me. On the contrary, what do you want with me? Nothing more than the pleasure of your society. Come into the garden, then, said the superintendent suddenly, or into the park. No, replied the musketeer hastily. No. Why? The fresh air. Come, admit at once that you arrest me, said the superintendent to the captain. Never, said the latter. You intend to look after me, then? Yes, Monseigneur, I do, upon my honor. Upon your honor? Ah, that is quite another thing. So I am to be arrested in my own house. Do not say such a thing. On the contrary, I will proclaim it aloud. If you do so, I shall be compelled to request you to be silent. Very good. Violence towards me and in my own house, too. We do not seem to understand one another at all. Stay a moment. There is a chessboard there. We will have a game, if you have no objections. Monsieur d'Artagnan, I am in disgrace, then? Not at all, but I am prohibited, I suppose, from withdrawing from your sight. I do not understand a word you are saying, Monseigneur, and if you wish me to withdraw, tell me so. My dear Monsieur d'Artagnan, your mode of action is enough to drive me mad. I was almost sinking for want of sleep, but you have completely awakened me. I shall never forgive myself, I am sure, and if you wish to reconcile me with myself, why, go to sleep in your bed in my presence, and I shall be delighted. I am under surveillance, I see. I will leave the room if you say any such thing. You are beyond my comprehension. Good night, Monseigneur, said D'Artagnan, as he pretended to withdraw. Fouquet ran after him. I will not lie down, he said. Seriously, and since you refuse to treat me as a man, and since you finesse with me, I will try and set you at bay, as a hunter does a wild boar. Bah! Cried D'Artagnan, pretending to smile. I shall order my horses and set off for Paris, said Fouquet, sounding the captain of the musketeers. If that be the case, Monseigneur, it is very difficult. You will arrest me, then? No, but I shall go along with you. That is quite sufficient, Monsieur d'Artagnan, returned Fouquet coldly. It was not for nothing you acquired your reputation as a man of intelligence and resource. But with me all this is quite superfluous. Let us come to the point. Do me a service. Why do you arrest me? What have I done? Oh, I know nothing about what you may have done, but I do not arrest you this evening at least. This evening, said Fouquet, turning pale. But tomorrow? It is not tomorrow just yet, Monseigneur. Who can ever answer for the morrow? Quick, quick, Captain. Let me speak to M. d'Herblay. Alas, that is quite impossible, Monseigneur. I have strict orders to see that you hold no communication with anyone. With M. d'Herblay, Captain, with your friend. Monseigneur, is M. d'Herblay the only person with whom you ought to be prevented holding any communication? Fouquet colored, and then assuming an air of resignation, he said, You are right, monsieur. You have taught me a lesson I ought not to have evoked. A fallen man cannot assert his right to anything, even from those whose fortunes he may have made. For a still stronger reason, he cannot claim anything from those to whom he may never have had the happiness of doing a service. Monseigneur, it is perfectly true, Monsieur d'Artagnan. You have always acted in the most admirable manner towards me, in such a manner, indeed, as most becomes a man who is destined to arrest me. You, at least, have never asked me anything. Monsieur, replied the Gascon, touched by his eloquent and noble tone of grief. "Will you? I ask it as a favor. Pledge me your word as a man of honor that you will not leave this room? What is the use of it, dear Monsieur d'Artagnan, since you keep watch and ward over me? Do you suppose I should contend against the most valiant sword in the kingdom? It is not that at all, Monseigneur, but that I am going to look for M. d'Herblay and, consequently, to leave you alone." Fouquet uttered a cry of delight and surprise. To look for M. d'Herblay. "To leave me alone," he exclaimed, clasping his hands together. "Which is M. d'Herblay's room. The blue room, is it not?" "Yes, my friend, yes." "Your friend. Thank you for that word, Monseigneur. You conferred upon me today, at least, if you have never done so before. Ah, you have saved me. It will take a good 10 minutes to go from hence to the blue room, and to return," said D'Artagnan. "Nearly so. And then to wake Aramis, who sleeps very soundly. When he is asleep, I put that down at another 5 minutes, making a total of 15 minutes absence. And now, Monseigneur, give me your word that you will not in any way attempt to make your escape, and that when I return I shall find you here again." "I give it, monsieur," replied Fouquet, with an expression of the warmest and deepest gratitude. D'Artagnan disappeared. Fouquet looked at him as he quitted the room, waited with a feverish impatience until the door was closed behind him, and as soon as it was shut, flew to his keys, opened 2 or 3 secret doors concealed in various articles of furniture in the room, looked vainly for certain papers, which doubtless he had left at St. Mandé, and which he seemed to regret not having found in them. Then hurriedly seizing hold of letters, contracts, papers, writings, he heaped them up into a pile, which he burnt in the extremest haste upon the marble hearth of the fireplace, not even taking time to draw from the interior of it the vases and pots of flowers with which it was filled. As soon as he had finished, like a man who had just escaped an imminent danger, and whose strength abandons him as soon as the danger is past, he sank down, completely overcome, on a couch. When D'Artagnan returned, he found Fouquet in the same position. The worthy musketeer had not the slightest doubt that Fouquet, having given his word, would not even think of failing to keep it, but he had thought it most likely that Fouquet would turn his D'Artagnan's absence to the best advantage in getting rid of all the papers, memorandums, and contracts which might possibly render his position, which was even now serious enough, more dangerous than ever. And so, lifting up his head like a dog who has regained the scent, he perceived an odor resembling smoke he relied on finding in the atmosphere, and having found it, made a movement of his head in token of satisfaction. As D'Artagnan entered, Fouquet, on his side, raised his head, and not one of D'Artagnan's movements escaped him. And then the looks of the 2 men met, and they both saw that they had understood each other, without exchanging a syllable. "Well," asked Fouquet, the first to speak, "and M. d'Herblay?" "Upon my word, Monseigneur," replied D'Artagnan, "M. d'Herblay must be desperately fond of walking out at night, and composing verses by moonlight in the Park of Vaux, with some of your poets, in all probability, for he is not in his own room." "What? Not in his own room?" cried Fouquet, whose last hope thus escaped him. For unless he could ascertain in what way the Bishop of N could assist him, he perfectly well knew that he could expect assistance from no other quarter. "Or, indeed," continued D'Artagnan, "if he is in his own room, he has very good reasons for not answering. But surely you did not call him in such a manner that he could have heard you? You can hardly suppose, Monseigneur, that having already exceeded my orders, which forbade me leaving you a single moment, you can hardly suppose, I say, that I should have been mad enough to rouse the whole house, and allow myself to be seen in the corridor of the Bishop of N, in order that M. Colbert might state with positive certainty that I gave you time to burn your papers." "My papers? Of course. At least that is what I should have done in your place. When anyone opens a door for me, I always avail myself of it." "Yes, yes, and I thank you, for I have availed myself of it. And you have done perfectly right. Every man has his own peculiar secrets, with which others have nothing to do. But let us return to Aramis, Monseigneur. Well, then, I tell you, you could not call loud enough, or Aramis would have heard you. However softly anyone may call Aramis, Monseigneur, Aramis always hears when he has an interest in hearing. I repeat what I said before. Aramis was not in his own room, or Aramis had certain reasons for not recognizing my voice, of which I am ignorant, and of which you may be even ignorant yourself. Notwithstanding your liege man is his greatness the Lord Bishop of Un. Fouquet drew a deep sigh, rose from his seat, took 3 or 4 turns in his room, and finished by seating himself, with an expression of extreme dejection, upon his magnificent bed with velvet hangings and costliest lace. D'Artagnan looked at Fouquet with feelings of the deepest and sincerest pity. "I have seen a good many men arrested in my life," said the Musketeer sadly. "I have seen both M. de Cinq-Mars and M. de Tillet arrested, though I was very young then. I have seen M. de Condé arrested with the princes. I have seen M. de Retz arrested. I have seen M. Broussel arrested. Stay a moment, monseigneur. It is disagreeable to have to say, but the very one of all those whom you most resemble at this moment was that poor fellow Broussel. You were very near doing as he did, putting your dinner napkin in your portfolio and wiping your mouth with your papers. Mordioux, Monseigneur Fouquet, a man like you ought not to be dejected in this manner. Suppose your friend saw you." "Monsieur d'Artagnan," returned the superintendent, with a smile full of gentleness, "you do not understand me. It is precisely because my friends are not looking on that I am as you see me now. I do not live, exist even, isolated from others. I am nothing when left to myself. Understand that throughout my whole life, I have passed every moment of my time in making friends, whom I hope to render my stay and support. In times of prosperity, all these cheerful, happy voices, rendered so through and by my means, form in my honor a concert of praise and kindly actions. In the least disfavor, these humbler voices accompanied in harmonious accents the murmur of my own heart. Isolation I have never yet known. Poverty, a phantom I have sometimes beheld, clad in rags, awaiting me at the end of my journey through life. Poverty has been the specter with which many of my own friends have trifled for years past, which they poetize and caress, and which has attracted me towards them. Poverty, I accept it, acknowledge it, receive it, as a disinherited sister, for poverty is neither solitude nor exile nor imprisonment. Is it likely I shall ever be poor, with such friends of Polisson as La Fontaine, as Molière, with such a mistress as... Oh, if you knew how utterly lonely and desolate I feel at this moment, and how you, who separate me from all I love, seem to resemble the image of solitude, of annihilation, death itself. But I have already told you, Monsieur Fouquet, replied D'Artagnan, moved to the depths of his soul, that you are woefully exaggerating. The king likes you. No, no, said Fouquet, shaking his head. M. Colbert hates you. M. Colbert, what does that matter to me? He will ruin you. Ah, I defy him to do that, for I am ruined already. At this singular confession of the superintendent, D'Artagnan cast his glance all round the room, and although he did not open his lips, Fouquet understood him so thoroughly that he added, "What can be done with such wealth of substance as surrounds us, when a man can no longer cultivate his taste for the magnificent? Do you know what good the greater part of the wealth and the possessions which we rich enjoy confer upon us, merely to disgust us, by their very splendor even, with everything which does not equal it? Vaux, you will say, and the wonders of Vaux. What of it? What boot these wonders? If I am ruined, how shall I fill with water the urns which my naiads bear in their arms, or force the air into the lungs of my Tritons? To be rich enough, Monsieur d'Artagnan, a man must be too rich." D'Artagnan shook his head. "Oh, I know very well what you think," replied Fouquet, quickly. "If Vaux were yours, you would sell it, and would purchase an estate in the country, an estate which should have woods, orchards, and land attached, so that the estate should be made to support its master. With 40 millions you might—" "10 millions," interrupted D'Artagnan. "Not a million, my dear captain. No one in France is rich enough to give 2 millions for Vaux, and to continue to maintain it as I have done. No one could do it. No one would know how." "Well," said D'Artagnan, "in any case, 1 million is not abject misery. It is not far from it, my dear monsieur, but you do not understand me. No, I will not sell my residence at Vaux. I will give it to you, if you like." And Fouquet accompanied these words with a movement of the shoulders to which it would be impossible to do justice. "Give it to the king. You will make a better bargain." "The king does not require me to give it to him," said Fouquet. "He will take it away from me with the most absolute ease and grace if it pleases him to do so, and that is the very reason I should prefer to see it perish. Do you know, Monsieur d'Artagnan, that if the king did not happen to be under my roof, I would take this candle, go straight to the dome, and set fire to a couple of huge chests of fusées and fireworks which are in reserve there, and would reduce my palace to ashes." "Bah!" said the Musketeer negligently. "At all events, you would not be able to burn the gardens, and that is the finest feature of the place." "And yet," resumed Fouquet thoughtfully, "what was I saying? Great heavens! Burn Vaux, destroy my palace. But Vaux is not mine. These wonderful creations are, it is true, the property, as far as sense of enjoyment goes, of the man who has paid for them, but as far as duration is concerned, they belong to those who created them. Vaux belongs to Lebrun, to Lenôtre, to Polisson, to Leval, to La Fontaine, to Molière. Vaux belongs to posterity. In fact, you see, Monsieur d'Artagnan, that my very house has ceased to be my own." "That is all well and good," said D'Artagnan. "The idea is agreeable enough, and I recognize Fouquet himself in it. That idea, indeed, makes me forget that poor fellow Broussel altogether, and I now fail to recognize in you the whining complaints of that old Frondeur. If you are ruined, monsieur, look at the affair manfully, for you too, Mordieux, belong to posterity, and have no right to lessen yourself in any way. Stay a moment. Look at me, I who seem to exercise in some degree a kind of superiority over you, because I am arresting you. Fate, which distributes their different parts to the comedians of this world, accorded me a less agreeable and less advantageous part to fill than yours has been. I am one of those who think that the parts which kings and powerful nobles are called upon to act are infinitely of more worth than the parts of beggars or lackeys. It is far better on the stage. On the stage, I mean, of another theater than the theater of this world. It is far better to wear a fine coat and talk a fine language than to walk the boards shod with a pair of old shoes, or to get one's backbone gently polished by a hearty dressing with a stick. In one word, you have been a prodigal with money. You have ordered and been obeyed, have been steeped to the lips in enjoyment, while I have dragged my tether after me, have been commanded and have obeyed, and have drudged my life away. Well, although I may seem of such trifling importance beside you, Monseigneur, I do declare to you that the recollection of what I have done serves me as a spur, and prevents me from bowing my old head too soon. I shall remain unto the very end a trooper, and when my turn comes, I shall fall perfectly straight, all in a heap, still alive, after having selected my place beforehand. Do as I do, Monsieur Fouquet, you will not find yourself the worse for it. A fall happens only once in a lifetime to men like yourself, and the chief thing is to take it gracefully when the chance presents itself. There's a Latin proverb. The words have escaped me, but I remember the sense of it very well, for I have thought over more than once, which says, "The end crowns the work." Fouquet rose from his seat, passed his arm round D'Artagnan's neck, and clasped him in a close embrace, whilst with the other hand he pressed his hand. "An excellent homily," he said after a moment's pause. "A soldier's, Monseigneur. You have a regard for me, in telling me all that. Perhaps—" Fouquet resumed his pensive attitude once more, and then a moment after he said, "Where can M. d'Herblay be? I dare not ask you to send for him. You would not ask me, because I would not do it, Monsieur Fouquet. People would learn it, and Aramis, who is not mixed up with the affair, might possibly be compromised and included in your disgrace." "I will wait here till daylight," said Fouquet. "Yes, that is best. What shall we do when daylight comes?" "I know nothing at all about it, Monseigneur. Monsieur d'Artagnan, will you do me a favor?" "Most willingly." "You guard me. I remain. You're acting in the full discharge of your duty, I suppose?" "Certainly." "Very good, then. Remain as close to me as my shadow, if you like, and I infinitely prefer such a shadow to anyone else." D'Artagnan bowed to the compliment. "But forget that you are Monsieur d'Artagnan, captain of the Musketeers. Forget that I am Monsieur Fouquet, superintendent of the finances, and let us talk about my affairs. That is rather a delicate subject." "Indeed?" "Yes. But for your sake, Monsieur Fouquet, I will do what may almost be regarded as an impossibility. Thank you. What did the king say to you? Nothing. Ah, is that the way you talk? The deuce! What do you think of my situation? I do not know. However, unless you have some ill feeling against me, your position is a difficult one. In what respect? Because you are under your own roof. However difficult it may be, I understand it very well. Do you suppose that, with anyone else but yourself, I should have shown so much frankness? What? So much frankness, do you say? You, who refused to tell me the slightest thing. At all events, then, so much ceremony and consideration. Ah, I have nothing to say in that respect. One moment, Monseigneur. Let me tell you how I should behave towards any one but yourself. It might be that I happened to arrive at your door just as your guests or your friends had left you. Or, if they had not gone yet, I should wait until they were leaving, and should then catch them one after the other, like rabbits. I should lock them up quietly enough. I should steal softly along the carpet of your corridor, and with one hand upon you, before you suspected the slightest thing amiss, I should keep you safely until my master's breakfast in the morning. In this way, I should just the same have avoided all publicity, all disturbance, all opposition. But there would also have been no warning for M. Fouquet, no consideration for his feelings, none of those delicate concessions which are shown by persons who are essentially courteous in their natures, whenever the decisive moment may arrive. Are you satisfied with the plan? It makes me shudder. I thought you would not like it. It would have been very disagreeable to have made my appearance tomorrow, without any preparation, and to have asked you to deliver up your sword. Oh, monsieur, I should have died of shame and anger. Your gratitude is too eloquently expressed. I have not done enough to deserve it, I assure you. Most certainly, monsieur, you will never get me to believe that. Well, then, monseigneur, if you are satisfied with what I have done, and have somewhat recovered from the shock which I prepared you for as much as I possibly could, let us allow the few hours that remain to pass away undisturbed. You are harassed and should arrange your thoughts. I beg you, therefore, go to sleep, or pretend to go to sleep, either on your bed or in your bed. I will sleep in this armchair, and when I fall asleep, my rest is so sound that a cannon would not wake me. Fouquet smiled. I expect, however, continued the Musketeer, the case of a door being opened, whether a secret door or any other, or the case of anyone going out of or coming into the room. For anything like that, my ear is as quick and sensitive as the ear of a mouse. Creaking noises make me start. It arises, I suppose, from a natural antipathy to anything of the kind. Move about as much as you like. Walk up and down in any part of the room. Write, efface, destroy, burn. Nothing like that will prevent me from going to sleep or even prevent me from snoring. But do not touch either the key or the handle of the door, for I should start up in a moment, and that would shake my nerves and make me ill. Monsieur d'Artagnan, said Fouquet, you are certainly the most witty and the most courteous man I ever met with, and you will leave me only one regret, that of having made your acquaintance so late. D'Artagnan drew a deep sigh, which seemed to say, Alas, you have perhaps made it too soon. He then settled himself in his armchair, while Fouquet, half lying on his bed and leaning on his arm, was meditating on his misadventures. In this way, both of them, leaving the candles burning, awaited the first dawn of the day, and when Fouquet happened to sigh too loudly, D'Artagnan only snored the louder. Not a single visit, not even from Aramis, disturbed their quietude. Not a sound even was heard throughout the whole vast palace. Outside, however, the guards of honor on duty and patrol of musketeers paced up and down, and the sound of their feet could be heard on the gravel walks. It seemed to act as an additional soporific for sleepers, while the murmuring of the wind through the trees and the unceasing music of the fountains whose waters tumbled in the basin still went on uninterruptedly, without being disturbed at the slight noises and items of little moment that constitute the life and death of human nature. Chapter 20. The morning, in vivid contrast to the sad and terrible destiny of the king imprisoned in the Bastille, and tearing, in sheer despair, the bolts and bars of his dungeon, the rhetoric of the chroniclers of old would not fail to present, as a complete antithesis, the picture of Philippe lying asleep beneath the royal canopy. We do not pretend to say that such rhetoric is always bad and always scatters, in places where they have no right to grow, the flowers with which it embellishes and enlivens history. But we shall, on the present occasion, carefully avoid polishing the antithesis in question, but shall proceed to draw another picture as minutely as possible to serve as foil and counterfoil to the one in the preceding chapter. The young prince alighted from Aramis's room, in the same way the king had descended from the apartment dedicated to Morpheus. The dome gradually and slowly sank down under Aramis's pressure, and Philippe stood beside the royal bed, which had ascended again after having deposited its prisoner in the secret depths of the subterranean passage. Alone, in the presence of all the luxury which surrounded him, alone, in the presence of his power, alone, with the part he was about to be forced to act, Philippe for the first time felt his heart and mind and soul expand beneath the influence of 1,000 mutable emotions, which are the vital throbs of a king's heart. He could not help changing color when he looked upon the empty bed, still tumbled by his brother's body. This mute accomplice had returned after having completed the work it had been destined to perform. It returned with the traces of crime. It spoke to the guilty author of that crime, with a frank and unreserved language which an accomplice never fears to use in the company of his companion in guilt. For it spoke the truth. Philippe bent over bed and perceived a pocket handkerchief lying on it, which was still damp from the cold sweat which had poured from Louis XIV's face. This sweat-stained handkerchief terrified Philippe, as the gore of Abel frightened Cain. "I am face to face with my destiny," said Philippe, his eyes on fire and his face a livid white. "Is it likely to be more terrifying than my captivity has been sad and gloomy? Though I am compelled to follow out, at every moment, the sovereign power and authority I have usurped, shall I cease to listen to the scruples of my heart? Yes, the king has lain on this bed. It is indeed his head that has left its impression on this pillow, his bitter tears that have stained his handkerchief. And yet I hesitate to throw myself on the bed or to press in my hand the handkerchief which is embroidered with my brother's arms. Away with such weakness. Let me imitate M. D'Herblay, who asserts that a man's action should be always one degree above his thoughts. Let me imitate D'Herblay, whose thought are of and for himself alone, who regards himself as a man of honor, so long as he injures or betrays his enemies only. I alone, should have occupied this bed if Louis XIV had not, owing to my mother's criminal abandonment, stood in my way, and this handkerchief, embroidered with the arms of France, would in right and justice belong to me alone, if, as M. D'Herblay observes, I had been left my royal cradle. Philippe, son of France, take your place on that bed. Philippe, sole king of France, resume the blazonry that is yours. Philippe, sole heir presumptive to Louis XIII. Your father, show yourself without pity or mercy for the usurper who, at this moment, has not even to suffer the agony of the remorse of all that you have had to submit to. With these words, Philippe, notwithstanding an instinctive repugnance of feeling, and in spite of the shudder of terror which mastered his will, threw himself on the royal bed, and forced his muscles to press the still warm place where Louis XIV had lain, while he buried his burning face in the handkerchief still moistened by his brother's tears. With his head thrown back and buried in the soft down of his pillow, Philippe perceived above him the crown of France, suspended, as we have stated, by angels with outspread golden wings. A man may be ambitious of lying in a lion's den, but can hardly hope to sleep there quietly. Philippe listened attentively to every sound. His heart panted and throbbed at the very suspicion of approaching terror and misfortune, but confident in his own strength, which was confirmed by the force of an overpoweringly resolute determination, he waited until some decisive circumstance should permit him to judge for himself. He hoped that imminent danger might be revealed to him, like those phosphoric lights of the tempest, which show the sailors the altitude of the waves against which they have to struggle. But nothing approached. Silence, that mortal enemy of restless hearts and of ambitious minds, shrouded in the thickness of its gloom during the remainder of the night the future King of France, who lay there sheltered beneath his stolen crown. Towards the morning a shadow, rather than a body, glided into the royal chamber. Philippe expected his approach, and neither expressed nor exhibited any surprise. "Well, M. D'Herblay?" "Well, sire, all is accomplished." "How?" "Exactly as we expected." "Did he resist?" "Terribly. Tears and entreaties. And then a perfect stupor. But at last, at last, a complete victory and absolute silence. Did the governor of the Bastille suspect anything? Nothing. The resemblance, however, was the cause of the success. But the prisoner cannot fail to explain himself. Think well of that. I have myself been able to do as much as that on former occasion. I have already provided for every chance. In a few days, sooner if necessary, we will take the captive out of his prison and will send him out of the country, to a place of exile so remote. People can return from their exile, Monsieur d'Herblay, to a place of exile so distant. I was going to say that human strength and the duration of human life would not be enough for his return. Once more a cold look of intelligence passed between Aramis and the young king. And M. du Vallon? Ask Philippe in order to change the conversation. He will be presented to you today, and confidentially will congratulate you on the danger which that conspirator has made you run. What is to be done with him? With M. du Vallon? Yes. Confer a dukedom on him, I suppose. A dukedom, replied Aramis, smiling in a significant manner. Why do you laugh, Monsieur d'Herblay? I laugh at the extreme caution of your idea. Cautious? Why so? Your Majesty is doubtless afraid that poor Porthos may possibly become a troublesome witness, and you wish to get rid of him. What? In making him a duke? Certainly. You would assuredly kill him, for he would die from joy, and the secret would die with him. Good heavens! Yes, said Aramis, phlegmatically. I should lose a very good friend. At this moment, and in the middle of this idle conversation, under the light tone in which the two conspirators concealed their joy and pride at their mutual success, Aramis heard something which made him prick up his ears. What is that? Said Philippe. The dawn, sire. Well, before you retired to bed last night, you probably decided to do something this morning at break of day. Yes, I told my captain of the Musketeers, replied the young man hurriedly, that I should expect him. If you told him that, he will certainly be here, for he is a most punctual man. I hear a step in the vestibule. It must be he. Come, let us begin the attack, said the young king resolutely. Be cautious, for heaven's sake. To begin the attack, and with D'Artagnan, would be madness. D'Artagnan knows nothing. He has seen nothing. He is 100 miles from suspecting our mystery in the slightest degree, but if he comes into this room the first this morning, he will be sure to detect something of what has taken place, and which he would imagine it his business to occupy himself about. Before we allow D'Artagnan to penetrate into this room, we must air the room thoroughly, or introduce so many people into it, that the keenest scent in the whole kingdom may be deceived by the traces of 20 different persons. But how can I send him away, since I have given him a rendezvous? Observed the prince, impatient to measure swords with so redoubtable an antagonist. I will take care of that, replied the bishop. And in order to begin, I am going to strike a blow which will completely stupefy our man. He, too, is striking a blow, for I hear him at the door, added the prince hurriedly. And, in fact, a knock at the door was heard at that moment. Aramis was not mistaken, for it was indeed D'Artagnan who adopted that mode of announcing himself. We have seen how he passed the night in philosophizing with M. Fouquet, but the musketeer was very weary even of feigning to fall asleep, and as soon as earliest dawn illumined with its gloomy gleams of light the sumptuous cornices of the superintendent's room, D'Artagnan rose from his armchair, arranged his sword, brushed his coat and hat with his sleeve, like a private soldier getting ready for inspection. Are you going out? Said Fouquet. Yes, monseigneur. And you? I shall remain. You pledge your word? Certainly. Very good. Besides, my only reason for going out is to try and get that reply. You know what I mean? That sentence, you mean... Stay, I have something of the old Roman in me. This morning, when I got up, I remarked that my sword had got caught in one of the aiguillettes, and that my shoulder belt had slipped quite off. That is an infallible sign. Of prosperity? Yes, be sure of it. For every time that confounded belt of mine stuck fast in my back, it always signified a punishment from M. de Treville or a refusal of money by M. de Mazarin. Every time my sword hung fast in my shoulder belt, it always predicted some disagreeable commission, or another for me to execute, and I have had showers of them all my life through. Every time, too, my sword danced about in its sheath, A duel, fortunate in its result, was sure to follow. Whenever it dangled about the calves of my legs, it signified a slight wound. Every time it fell completely out of the scabbard, I was booked and made up my mind that I should have to remain on the field of battle, with 2 or 3 months under surgical bandages into the bargain. "I did not know your sword kept you so well informed," said Fouquet with a faint smile, which showed how he was struggling against his own weakness. "Is your sword bewitched, or under the influence of some imperial charm? Why, you must know that my sword may almost be regarded as part of my own body. I have heard that certain men seem to have warnings given them by feeling something the matter with their legs, or a throbbing of their temples. With me, it is my sword that warns me. Well, it told me of nothing this morning. But stay a moment. Look here. It has just fallen of its own accord into the last hole of the belt. Do you know what that is a warning of?" "No." "Well, that tells me of an arrest that will have to be made this very day." "Well," said the superintendent, more astonished than annoyed by this frankness, "if there is nothing disagreeable predicted to you by your sword, I am to conclude that it is not disagreeable for you to arrest me." "You arrest you?" "Of course. The warning does not concern you, since you have been arrested ever since yesterday. It is not you I shall have to arrest. Be assured of that. That is the reason why I am delighted, and also the reason why I said that my day will be a happy one." And with these words, pronounced with the most affectionate graciousness of manner, the captain took leave of Fouquet in order to wait upon the king. He was on the point of leaving the room, when Fouquet said to him, "One last mark of kindness." "What is it, monseigneur?" D'Herblay, let me see Monsieur D'Herblay. I am going to try and get him to come to you." D'Artagnan did not think himself so good a prophet. It was written that the day would pass away and realize all the predictions that had been made in the morning. He had accordingly knocked, as we have seen, at the king's door. The door opened. The captain thought that it was the king who had just opened it himself, and this supposition was not altogether inadmissible, considering the state of agitation in which he had left Louis XIV the previous evening. But instead of his royal master, whom he was on the point of saluting with the greatest respect, he perceived the long, calm features of Aramis. So extreme was his surprise that he could hardly refrain from uttering a loud exclamation. "Aramis," he said. "Good morning, dear D'Artagnan," replied the prelate coldly. "You here?" stammered out the musketeer. "His Majesty desires you to report that he is still sleeping, after having been greatly fatigued during the whole night." "Ah," said D'Artagnan, who could not understand how the Bishop of Un, who had been so indifferent a favorite the previous evening, had become in half a dozen hours the most magnificent mushroom of fortune that had ever sprung up in a sovereign's bedroom. In fact, to transmit the orders of the king even to mere threshold of that monarch's room, to serve as an intermediary of Louis XIV, so as to be able to give a single order in his name at a couple paces from him, he must have become more than Richelieu had ever been to Louis XIII. D'Artagnan's expressive eye, half-open lips, his curling mustache, said as much indeed in the plainest language to the chief favorite, who remained calm and perfectly unmoved. "Moreover," continued the bishop, "you will be good enough, Monsieur le Capitaine de Musketeers, to allow those only to pass into the king's room this morning who have special permission. His Majesty does not wish to be disturbed just yet." "But," objected D'Artagnan, almost on the point of refusing to obey this order, and particularly of giving unrestrained passage to the suspicions which the king's silence had aroused. "But, Monsieur l'Évêque, His Majesty gave me a rendezvous for this morning." Later," said the king's voice, from the bottom of the alcove, a voice which made a cold shudder pass through the musketeer's veins. He bowed, amazed, confused, and stupefied by the smile with which Aramis seemed to overwhelm him as soon as these words had been pronounced. "And then," continued the bishop, "as an answer to what you are coming to ask the king, my dear D'Artagnan, here is an order of His Majesty, which you will be good enough to attend to forthwith, for it concerns M. Fouquet." D'Artagnan took the order which was held out to him. "To be set at liberty," he murmured. "Ah!" And he uttered a second "ah!" still more full of intelligence than the former. For this order explained Aramis's presence with the king, and that Aramis, in order to have obtained Fouquet's pardon, must have made considerable progress in the royal favor, and that this favor explained in its tenor the hardly conceivable assurance with which M. D'Herblay issued the order in the king's name. For D'Artagnan, it was quite sufficient to have understood something of the matter in hand to order to understand the rest. He bowed and withdrew a couple of paces, as though he were about to leave. "I am going with you," said the bishop. "Where to?" "To M. Fouquet. I wish to be a witness of his delight." "Ah, Aramis, how you puzzle me just now," said D'Artagnan again. "But you understand now, I suppose?" "Of course I understand," he said aloud, but added in a low tone to himself, almost hissing the words between his teeth. "No, no, I do not understand yet, but it is all the same, for here is an order for it." And then he added, "I will lead the way, monseigneur," and he conducted Aramis to Fouquet's apartments. Chapter 21. The King's Friend. Fouquet was waiting with anxiety. He had already sent away many of his servants and friends, who, anticipating the usual hour of his ordinary receptions, had called at his door to inquire after him. Preserving the utmost silence respecting the danger which hung suspended by a hair above his head, he only asked them, as he did everyone, indeed, who came to the door, where Aramis was. When he saw D'Artagnan return, and when he perceived the bishop behind him, he could hardly restrain his delight. It was fully equal to his previous uneasiness. The mere sight of Aramis was a complete compensation to the surintendant for the unhappiness he had undergone in his arrest. The prelate was silent and grave, D'Artagnan completely bewildered by such an accumulation of events. "Well, Captain, so you brought M. D'Herblay to me. And something better still, monseigneur." "What is that?" "Liberty. I am free." "Yes, by the king's order." Fouquet resumed his usual serenity, that he might interrogate Aramis with a look. "Oh, yes, you can thank M. l'Évêque de Vannes," pursued D'Artagnan, "for it is indeed to him that you owe the change that has taken place in the king." "Oh," said Fouquet, more humiliated at the service than grateful at its success. "But you," continued D'Artagnan, addressing Aramis, "you, who have become M. Fouquet's protector and patron, can you not do something for me?" "Anything in the wide world you like, my friend," replied the bishop in his calmest tones. "One thing only, then, and I shall be perfectly satisfied. How on earth did you manage to become the favorite of the king, you who have never spoken to him more than twice in your life?" "From a friend such as you are," said Aramis, "I cannot conceal anything." "Ah, very good. Tell me, then." "Very well. You think that I have seen the king only twice, whilst the fact is I have seen him more than 100 times. Only we have kept it very secret. That is all." And without trying to remove the color which at this revelation made D'Artagnan's face flush scarlet, Aramis turned towards M. Fouquet, who was as much surprised as the Musketeer. "Monseigneur," he resumed, "the king desires me to inform you that he is more than ever your friend, and that your beautiful fate, so generously offered by you on his behalf, has touched him to the very heart." And thereupon he saluted M. Fouquet with so much reverence of manner that the latter, incapable of understanding a man whose diplomacy was of so prodigious a character, remained incapable of uttering a single syllable, and equally incapable of thought or movement. D'Artagnan fancied he perceived that these two men had something to say to each other, and he was about to yield to that feeling of instinctive politeness which in such a case hurries a man towards a door, when he feels his presence is an inconvenience for others. But his eager curiosity, spurred on by so many mysteries, counseled him to remain. Aramis thereupon turned towards him and said in a quiet tone, "You will not forget, my friend, the king's order respecting those whom he intends to receive this morning on rising." These words were clear enough, and the Musketeer understood them. He therefore bowed to Fouquet, and then to Aramis, to the latter with a slight admixture of ironical respect, and disappeared. No sooner had he left than Fouquet, whose impatience had hardly been able to wait for that moment, darted toward the door to close it. And then returning to the bishop, he said, "My dear D'Herblay, I think it now high time you should explain all that has passed, for, in plain and honest truth, I do not understand anything." "We will explain all that to you," said Aramis, sitting down and making Fouquet sit down also. "Where shall I begin?" "With this first of all. Why does the king set me at liberty?" "You ought rather to ask me what his reason was for having you arrested." "Since my arrest, I have had time to think over it, and my idea is that it arises out of some slight feeling of jealousy." My fate put M. Colbert out of temper, and M. Colbert discovered some cause of complaint against me. Belial, for instance. No, there is no question at all just now of Belial. What is it then? Do you remember those receipts for 13 millions which M. de Mazarin contrived to steal from you? Yes, of course. Well, you were pronounced a public robber. Good heavens! Oh, that is not all. Do you also remember that letter you wrote to Lavalier? Alas, yes. And that proclaims you a traitor and a suborner. Why should he have pardoned me, then? We have not yet arrived at that part of our argument. I wish you to be quite convinced of the fact itself. Observe this well. The king knows you to be guilty of an appropriation of public funds. Oh, of course I know that you have done nothing of the kind. But, at all events, the king has seen the receipts, and he can do no other than believe you are incriminated. I beg your pardon, I do not see. You will see presently, though. The king, moreover, having read your love letter to Lavalier, and he offers you their mater, cannot retain any doubt of your intentions with regard to that young lady. You will admit that, I suppose? Certainly. Pray conclude. In the fewest words, the king, we may henceforth assume, is your powerful, implacable, and eternal enemy. Agreed. But am I, then, so powerful that he has not dared to sacrifice me, notwithstanding his hatred, with all the means which my weakness or my misfortunes may have given him as a hold upon me? It is clear, beyond all doubt, pursued Aramis coldly, that the king has quarreled with you irreconcilably. But, since he has absolved me, do you believe it likely? Asked the bishop, with a searching look. Without believing in his sincerity, I believe it in the accomplished fact. Aramis slightly shrugged his shoulders. But why, then, should Louis XIV have commissioned you to tell me what you have just stated? The king charged me with no message for you. With nothing, said the superintendent, stupefied. But that order... Oh, yes, you are quite right. There's an order, certainly. And these words were pronounced by Aramis in so strange a tone that Fouquet could not resist starting. You are concealing something from me, I see. What is it? Aramis softly rubbed his white fingers over his chin, but said nothing. Does the king exile me? Do not act as if you were playing the game children play it when they have to try and guess where things have been hidden and are informed by a bell being rung when they are approaching near to it or going away from it. Speak, then. Guess. You alarm me. Bah, that is because you have not guessed then. What did the king say to you? In the name of our friendship, do not deceive me. The king has not said one word to me. You are killing me with impatience, D'Herblay. Am I still superintendent? As long as you like. But what extraordinary empire have you so suddenly acquired over His Majesty's mind? Ah, that's the point. He does your bidding? I believe so. It is hardly credible. So anyone would say, D'Herblay, by our alliance, by our friendship, by everything you hold dearest in the world, speak openly, I implore you. By what means have you succeeded in overcoming Louis XIV? As prejudices, for he did not like you, I am certain. The king will like me now, said Aramis, laying stress upon the last word. You have something particular, then, between you? Yes. A secret, perhaps? A secret? A secret of such a nature as to change His Majesty's interests? You are, indeed, a man of superior intelligence, Monseigneur, and have made a particularly accurate guess. I have, in fact, discovered a secret of a nature to change the interests of the King of France. Ah, said Fouquet, with the reserve of a man who does not wish to ask any more questions. And you shall judge of it yourself, pursued Aramis, and you shall tell me if I am mistaken with regard to the importance of this secret. I am listening, since you are good enough to unbosom yourself to me. Only do not forget that I have asked you about nothing which it may be indiscreet in you to communicate. Aramis seemed for a moment as if he were collecting himself. Do not speak, said Fouquet. There is still time enough. Do you remember, said the bishop, casting down his eyes, the birth of Louis XIV, as if it were yesterday? Have you ever heard anything particular respecting his birth? Nothing, except that the king was not really the son of Louis XIII. That does not matter to us or the kingdom either. He is the son of his father, says the French law, whose father is recognized by law. True, but it is a grave matter when the quality of races is called into question. A merely secondary question, after all, so that, in fact, you have never learned or heard anything in particular? Nothing. That is where my secret begins. The queen, you must know, instead of being delivered a son, was delivered of twins. Fouquet looked up suddenly as he replied, "And the second is dead?" "You will see. These twins seemed likely to be regarded as the pride of their mother and the hope of France, but the weak nature of the king, his superstitious feelings, made him apprehend a series of conflicts between two children whose rights were equal. So he put out a way. He suppressed one of the twins." "Suppressed, you say?" "Have patience. Both the children grew up, the one on the throne, whose minister you are, the other, who is my friend, in gloom and isolation. Good heavens! What are you saying, Monsieur d'Herblay? And what is this poor prince doing? Ask me, rather, what has he done? Yes, yes. He was brought up in the country, and then thrown into a fortress which goes by the name of the Bastille. Is it possible?" cried the superintendent, clasping his hands. "The one was the most fortunate of men, the other the most unhappy and miserable of all living beings. Does his mother not know this? And if Austria knows it all, and the king knows absolutely nothing." "So much the better," said Fouquet. This remark seemed to make a great impression on Aramis. He looked at Fouquet with the most anxious expression of countenance. "I beg your pardon, I interrupted you," said Fouquet. "I was saying," resumed Aramis, "that this poor prince was the unhappiest of human beings when heaven, whose thoughts are over all his creatures, undertook to come to his assistance." "Oh, in what way? Tell me." "You will see. The reigning king. I say the reigning king. You can guess very well why." "No. Why?" "Because both of them, being legitimate princes, ought to have been kings. Is not that your opinion?" "It is, certainly. Unreservedly, most unreservedly. Twins are one person in two bodies. I am pleased that a legist of your learning and authority should pronounce such an opinion. It is agreed, then, that each of them possessed equal rights, is it not?" "Incontestably. But, gracious heavens, what an extraordinary circumstance! We are not at the end of it, yet the patience. Oh, I shall find patience enough. Heaven wished to raise up for that oppressed child an avenger, or a supporter, or vindicator, if you prefer it. It happened that the reigning king, the usurper— You are quite of my opinion, I believe, that it is an act of usurpation quietly to enjoy, and selfishly to assume the right over, an inheritance to which a man has only half a right. Yes, usurpation is the word. In that case, I continue, it was heaven's will that the usurper should possess, in the person of his first minister, a man of great talent, of large and generous nature." "Well, well," said Fouquet, "I understand you. You have relied upon me to repair the wrong which has been done to this unhappy brother of Louis XIV. You have thought well. I will help you. I thank you, D'Herblay, I thank you." "Oh, no, it is not that at all. You have not allowed me to finish," said Aramis, perfectly unmoved. "I will not say another word, then. Fouquet, I was observing. The minister, the reigning sovereign, was suddenly taken into greatest aversion, and menaced with the ruin of his fortune, loss of liberty, loss of life even, by intrigue and personal hatred, to which the king gave too readily an attentive ear. But heaven permits, still, however, out of consideration for the unhappy prince who had been sacrificed, that Fouquet should in his turn have a devoted friend who knew the state secret, and felt that he possessed strength and courage enough to divulge this secret, after having had the strength to carry it locked up in his own heart for 20 years. "Go no farther," said Fouquet, full of generous feelings. "I understand you and can guess everything now. You went to see the king when the intelligence of my arrest reached you. You implored him. He refused to listen to you. Then you threatened him with that secret, threatened to reveal it, and Louis XIV, alarmed at the risk of its betrayal, granted the terror of your indiscretion what he refused to your generous intercession. I understand. I understand. You have the king in your power. I understand. You understand nothing. As yet, replied Aramis, and again you interrupt me. Then, too, allow me to observe that you pay no attention to logical reasoning, and seem to forget what you ought most to remember. What do you mean? You know upon what I laid the greatest stress at the beginning of our conversation? Yes, His Majesty's hate, invincible hate for me. Yes, but what feeling of hate could resist the threat of such a revelation? Such a revelation, do you say? That is the very point where your logic fails you. What? Do you suppose that if I had made such a revelation to the king, I should have been alive now? It is not 10 minutes ago that you were with the king. That may be. He might not have had the time to get me killed outright, but he would have had the time to get me gagged and thrown in a dungeon. Come, show a little consistency in your reasoning, and by the mere use of this word, which was so thoroughly his old musketeer's expression, forgotten by one who never seemed to forget anything, Fouquet could not but understand to what a pitch of exaltation the calm, impenetrable Bishop of Vannes had wrought himself. He shuddered, and then replied the latter, after having mastered his feelings, should I be the man I really am, should I be the true friend you believe me, if I were to expose you, whom the king already hates so bitterly, to a feeling more than ever to be dreaded in that young man? To have robbed him is nothing. To have addressed a woman he loves is not much, but to hold in your keeping both his crown and his honor, why, he would pluck out your heart with his own hands. You have not allowed him to penetrate your secret, then? I would sooner, far sooner, have swallowed at one draught all the poisons that Mithridates drank in 20 years, in order to try and avoid death, than have betrayed my secret to the king. What have you done, then? Now we are coming to the point, Monseigneur. I think I shall not fail to excite in you a little interest. You are listening, I hope. How can you ask me if I am listening? Go on. Aramis walked softly all round the room, satisfied himself that they were alone, and that all was silent, and then returned and placed himself close to the armchair in which Fouquet was seated, awaiting with the deepest anxiety the revelation he had to make. I forgot to tell you, resumed Aramis, addressing himself to Fouquet, who listened to him with the most absorbed attention. I forgot to mention a most remarkable circumstance respecting these twins, namely, that God had formed them so startlingly, so miraculously like each other, that it would be utterly impossible to distinguish the one from the other. Their own mother would not be able to distinguish them. Is it possible? Exclaimed Fouquet. The same noble character in their features, the same carriage, the same stature, the same voice. But their thoughts, degree of intelligence, their knowledge of human life, there's an equality there, I admit, Monseigneur. Yes, for the prisoner of the Bastille is, most incontestably, superior in every way to his brother. And if from his prison this unhappy victim were to pass to the throne, France would not, from the earliest period of its history, perhaps, have had a master more powerful in genius and nobility of character. Fouquet buried his face in his hands, as if he were overwhelmed by the weight of this immense secret. Aramis approached him. There is a further inequality, he said, continuing his work of temptation, an inequality which concerns yourself, Monseigneur, between the twins, both sons of Louis XIII. Namely, the last comer does not know M. Colbert. Fouquet raised his head immediately. His features were pale and distorted. The bolt had hit its mark, not his heart, but his mind and comprehension. I understand you, he said to Aramis. You are proposing a conspiracy to me? Something like it. One of those attempts which, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, alters the fate of empires, and of superintendents, too. Yes, Monseigneur. In a word, you propose that I should agree to the substitution of the son of Louis XIII, who is now a prisoner in the Bastille, for the son of Louis XIII, who is at this moment asleep in the chamber of Morpheus? Aramis smiled with a sinister expression of the sinister thought which was passing through his brain. Exactly, he said. Have you thought? Continued Fouquet, becoming animated with that strength of talent which in a few seconds originates and matures a conception of a plan, and with that largeness of view which foresees all consequences and embraces every result at a glance. Have you thought that we must assemble the nobility, the clergy, and the third estate of the realm, that we shall have to depose the reigning sovereign, to disturb by so frightful a scandal the tomb of their dead father, to sacrifice the life, the honor of a woman and of Austria, the life and peace of mind and heart of another woman, Maria Theresa, and suppose it were all done if we were to succeed in doing it. I do not understand you, continued Aramis, coldly. There is not a single syllable of sense in all you have just said. What? Said the superintendent, surprised. A man like you refused to view the practical bearing of the case. Do you confine yourself to the childish delight of a political illusion and neglect the chances of its being carried into execution? In other words, the reality itself, is it possible? My friend, said Aramis, emphasizing the word with kind of disdainful familiarity, what does heaven do in order to substitute one king for another? Heaven, exclaimed Fouquet. Heaven gives directions to its agent, who seizes upon the doomed victim, hurries him away, and seats the triumphant rival on the empty throne. But you forget that this agent is called death. Oh, Monsieur d'Herblay, in heaven's name, tell me if you have had the idea. There is no question of that, Monseigneur. You are going beyond the object in view. Who spoke of Louis XIV? Esteth? Who spoke of adopting the example which heaven sets in following out the strict execution of its decrees? No, I wish you to understand that heaven effects its purposes without confusion or disturbance, without exciting comment or remark, without difficulty or exertion, and that men inspired by heaven succeed like heaven itself in all their undertakings, in all they attempt, in all they do. What do you mean? I mean, my friend, returned Aramis, with the same intonation on the word friend that he had applied to it the first time. I mean that if there had been any confusion, scandal, and even effort in the substitution of the prisoner for the king, I defy you to prove it. What? Cried Fouquet, whiter than the handkerchief with which he wiped his temples. What do you say? Go to the king's apartment, continued Aramis tranquilly. And you who know the mystery, I defy even you perceive that the prisoner of the Bastille is lying in his brother's bed. But the king, stammered Fouquet, seized with horror at the intelligence. What king? Said Aramis, in his gentlest tone. The one who hates you or the one who likes you? The king of yesterday. The king of yesterday. Be quite easy on that score. He has gone to take the place in the Bastille, which his victim occupied for so many years. Great God! And who took him there? I. You. Yes, and in the simplest way. I carried him away last night, while he was descending into midnight. The other was ascending into day. I do not think there has been any disturbance whatever. A flash of lightning without thunder awakens nobody. Fouquet uttered a thick, smothered cry, as if he had been struck by some invisible blow, and clasping his head between his clenched hands, he murmured, You did that? Cleverly enough, too. What do you think of it? You dethroned the king? Imprisoned him, too? Yes, that has been done. And such an action was committed here at Vaux. Yes, here, at Vaux, in the chamber of Morpheus. It would almost seem that it had been built in anticipation of such an act. And at what time did it occur? Last night, between 12 and 1 o'clock. Fouquet made a movement as if he were on the point of springing upon Aramis. He restrained himself. At Vaux, under my roof, he said in a half-strangled voice. I believe so, for it is still your house, and it is likely to continue so, since M. Colbert cannot rob you of it now. It was under my roof, then, monsieur, that you committed this crime? This crime, said Aramis, stupefied. This abominable crime, pursued Fouquet, becoming more and more excited. This crime more execrable than assassination. This crime which dishonors my name forever and entails upon me the horror of posterity. You are not in your senses, monsieur, replied Aramis, in an irresolute tone of voice. You are speaking too loudly. Take care. I will call out so loudly that the whole world shall hear me. Monsieur Fouquet, take care. Fouquet turned round towards the prelate, whom he looked at full in the face. You have dishonored me, he said, in committing so foul an act of treason, so heinous a crime upon my guest, upon one who was peacefully reposing beneath my roof. Oh, woe is me. Woe to the man, rather, who beneath your roof meditated the ruin of your fortune, your life. Do you forget that? He was my guest, my sovereign. Aramis rose. his eyes literally bloodshot, his mouth trembling convulsively. "Have I a man out of his senses to deal with?" he said. "You have an honorable man to deal with. You are mad. A man who will prevent you consummating your crime. You are mad, I say. A man who would sooner, oh, far sooner, die, who would kill you even, rather than allow you to complete his dishonor." And Fouquet snatched up his sword, which D'Artagnan had placed at the head of his bed, and clenched it resolutely in his hand. Aramis frowned and thrust his hand into his breast as if in search of a weapon. This movement did not escape Fouquet, who, full of nobleness and pride in his magnanimity, threw his sword to a distance from him, and approached Aramis so close as to touch his shoulder with his disarmed hand. "Monsieur," he said, "I would sooner die here on the spot than survive this terrible disgrace. And if you have any pity left for me, I entreat you to take my life." Aramis remained silent and motionless. "You do not reply?" said Fouquet. Aramis raised his head gently, and a glimmer of hope might be seen once more to animate his eyes. "Reflect, Monseigneur," he said, "upon everything we have to expect. As the matter now stands, the king is still alive, and his imprisonment saves your life." "Yes," replied Fouquet, "you may have been acting on my behalf, but I do not accept your services. But, first of all, I do not wish your ruin. You will leave this house." Aramis stifled the exclamation, which almost escaped his broken heart. "I am hospitable towards all who are dwellers beneath my roof," continued Fouquet, with an air of inexpressible majesty. "You will not be more fatally lost than he whose ruin you have consummated." "You will be so," said Aramis in a hoarse, prophetic voice. "You will be so, believe me." "I accept the augury, Monsieur d'Herblay, but nothing shall prevent me, nothing shall stop me. You will leave Vaux. You must leave France. I give you 4 hours to place yourself out of the king's reach." "4 hours," said Aramis, scornfully and incredulously. "Upon the word of Fouquet, no one shall follow you before the expiration of that time. You will therefore have 4 hours advance of those whom the king may wish to dispatch after you." "4 hours," repeated Aramis in a thick, smothered voice. "It is more than you will need to get on board a vessel and flee to Belle Isle, which I give you as a place of refuge." "Ah," murmured Aramis, "Belle Isle is as much mine for you as Vaux is mine for the king. Go, D'Herblay, go. As long as I live, not a hair of your head shall be injured." "Thank you," said Aramis, with a cold irony of manner. "Go at once, then, and give me your hand, before we both hasten away. You to save your life, I to save my honor." Aramis withdrew from his breast a hand he had concealed there. It was stained with his blood. He had dug his nails into his flesh, as if in punishment for having nursed so many projects, more vain, insensate, and fleeting than the life of the man himself. Fouquet was horror-stricken, and then his heart smote him with pity. He threw open his arms as if to embrace him. "I had no arms," murmured Aramis, as wild and terrible in his wrath as the shade of Dido. And then, without touching Fouquet's hand, he turned his head aside and stepped back a pace or two. His last word was an imprecation, his last gesture a curse, which his blood-stained hand seemed to invoke, as it sprinkled on Fouquet's face a few drops of blood which flowed from his breast. And both of them darted out of the room by the secret staircase, which led down to the inner courtyard. Fouquet ordered his best horses, while Aramis paused at the foot of the staircase which led to Porthos's apartment. He reflected profoundly and for some time, while Fouquet's carriage left the courtyard at full gallop. "Shall I go alone," said Aramis to himself, "or warn the prince?" "Oh, fury! Warn the prince. And then do what? Take him with me? To carry this accusing witness about with me everywhere? War, too, would follow. Civil war, implacable in its nature. And without any resource save myself, it is impossible. What could he do without me? Oh, without me he will be utterly destroyed. Yet who knows? Let destiny be fulfilled. Condemned he was, let him remain so then. Good or evil spirit, gloomy and scornful power, whom men call the genius of humanity, thou art a power more restlessly uncertain, more baselessly useless, than wild mountain wind. Chance, thou term'st thyself, but thou art nothing. Thou inflamest everything with thy breath. crumblest mountains at thy approach, and suddenly art thyself destroyed at the presence of the cross of dead, while behind which stand another power invisible like thyself, whom thou deniest perhaps, but whose avenging hand is on thee, and hurls thee in the dust dishonored and unnamed. Lost! I am lost. What can be done? Flee to Belle-Isle? Yes, and leave Porthos behind me, to talk and relate the whole affair to every one. Porthos, too, who will have to suffer for what is done. I will not let poor Porthos suffer. He seems like one of the members of my own frame, and his grief or misfortune will be mine as well. Porthos shall leave with me, and shall follow my destiny. It must be so. And Aramis, apprehensive of meeting anyone to whom his hurried movements might appear suspicious, ascended the staircase without being perceived. Porthos, so recently returned from Paris, was already in a profound sleep. His huge body forgot its fatigue, as his mind forgot its thoughts. Aramis entered, light as a shadow, and placed his nervous grasp on the giant's shoulder. "Come, Porthos," he cried. "Come." Porthos obeyed, rose from his bed, opened his eyes, even before his intelligence seemed to be aroused. "We leave immediately," said Aramis. "Ah," returned Porthos, "we shall go mounted, and faster than we have ever gone in our lives." "Ah," repeated Porthos, "dress yourself, my friend." And he helped the giant to dress himself, and thrust his gold and diamonds into his pocket. Whilst he was thus engaged, a slight noise attracted his attention, and on looking up, he saw D'Artagnan watching him through the half-open door. Aramis started. "What the devil are you doing there in such an agitated manner?" said the Musketeer. "Hush!" said Porthos. "We are going off on a mission of great importance," added the bishop. "You are very fortunate," said the Musketeer. "Oh, dear me," said Porthos. "I feel so wearied. I would far sooner have been fast asleep. But the service of the king—" "Have you seen M. Fouquet?" said Aramis to D'Artagnan. "Yes, this very minute in a carriage." "What did he say to you?" "Adieu, nothing more." "Was that all? What else do you think he could say? Am I worth anything now, since you have got into such high favor?" "Listen," said Aramis, embracing the Musketeer. "Your good times are returning again. You will have no occasion to be jealous of anyone. Ah, bah! I predict that something will happen to you today which will increase your importance more than ever. Really? You know that I know all the news?" "Oh, yes." "Come, Porthos, are you ready? Let us go." "I am quite ready, Aramis." "Let us embrace D'Artagnan first." "Most certainly. But the horses?" "Oh, there's no one of them here. Will you have mine?" "No. Porthos has his own stud. So adieu, adieu." The fugitives mounted their horses beneath the very eyes of the captain of the Musketeers, who held Porthos' stirrup for him, and gazed after them until they were out of sight. On any other occasion, thought the Gascon, I should say that those gentlemen were making their escape. But in these days politics seems so changed that such an exit is termed going on a mission. I have no objection. Let me attend to my own affairs. That is more than enough for me. And he philosophically entered his apartments.